You've been told since the moment you could understand language that progress is a straight line, that success is a staircase you climb step by grueling step, that you pay your dues and work your way up, and that anything worth having takes years of steady, disciplined labor to achieve. You've been told that if you want to get past a problem, you must face it head-on, exert effort, push, sweat, and grind until you break through. You've been told there are no shortcuts, and that's the biggest lie you've ever been sold. Because the universe itself cheats. It has loopholes, hidden passages, bizarre, counterintuitive ways of getting from one side of an impossible barrier to the other without ever climbing over it. These aren't metaphorical loopholes. They're not abstract motivational slogans. They are literal laws of nature. Particles, the tiniest building blocks of everything, routinely break the very rules we think govern reality. They vanish from one side of a barrier and reappear on the other side, without possessing enough energy to have crossed in any conventional sense. It's called quantum tunneling. And once you understand it, you'll never look at your own limits the same way again. Because if matter, the stuff that makes you, me, the camera, your coffee mug, the stars in the sky, can skip the line and leap straight to the other side, why would you think you're condemned to the slow, linear route? This series will not be about physics trivia for science hobbyists. It's about how to take a phenomenon buried in the heart of quantum mechanics and apply it to the way you live, think, create, and achieve. We're going to strip tunneling down to its principles. Then rebuild it as a strategy for shattering the slow, predictable grind of normal progress. You'll see that most obstacles aren't solid walls, they're probability filters. They look fixed, but they're permeable in ways your old thinking never noticed. Over the course of this journey, we will expose the lies of linear progress and why it's the least efficient route nature ever devised. Translate quantum tunneling's mechanics into actionable strategies for jumping straight to the outcomes you want. Map out the psychological, energetic, and behavioral energy states that make your own jumps possible. Show you how to detect the moment when you're already mid-leap and how to accelerate it. Reveal the hidden mental barriers that are stronger than any real-world obstacle. Teach you to create controlled micro-jumps that lead to seismic shifts over time. And ultimately, free you from the belief that walls are permanent, that timelines are fixed, or that you are locked into a single path. You're going to see, again and again, that reality is not rigid. It is elastic, probabilistic, and surprisingly negotiable, if you know the conditions under which the universe bends. By the end, you'll not only believe in shortcuts, you'll have a framework for using them. And it won't be motivation. It will be physics as applied philosophy. Right now, you are standing in front of some kind of barrier. It might be a financial barrier. It might be a skill gap. It might be a personal limitation you've carried for years. The old way says, climb, push harder, endure. Eventually, maybe you'll get over it. But quantum tunneling says, no. You don't have to climb the wall. You don't have to knock it down. You can be on the other side without ever confronting it directly, if you understand how to exist in the state that allows the jump to occur. This series is going to take you from "that sounds impossible" to "I've done it." And the path we take will not be straight. It will loop through physics, probability, mindset, and the strange new terrain of nonlinear achievement. If you came here for another pep talk about persistence, you're in the wrong place. This is for people ready to outsmart the system instead of obeying it. People who want to stop playing the game on hard mode. People who understand that sometimes the best way past a barrier is to skip the climb entirely. You've heard of taking the shortcut through a side street. Now you'll learn the shortcut through reality itself. Next, we will uncover the strange way particles appear to ignore the laws we thought were absolute, and why this single fact has the power to break open every limit you've ever known. The first time quantum tunneling was confirmed in a physics lab, it didn't look like the kind of thing that should change the way you live your life. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights. No explosion. No aha moment where a scientist shouts about rewriting the laws of reality. It was just a measurement, a set of numbers showing that something had happened which, according to all classical reasoning, should not have happened at all. A particle that didn't have the energy to overcome a barrier had been detected on the far side of that barrier. And yet, while physicists cataloged it, argued over the math, and filed it under weird but real, the implications sat there, hidden in plain sight. Because if a barrier isn't always the end of the road for particles, maybe it isn't always the end of the road for you either. Here's the trap. People hear about quantum tunneling and immediately stick it in the mental folder marked cool science fact, alongside black holes, supernovas, and Schrödinger's cat. Interesting, yes, but irrelevant to everyday existence. That folder is where life-changing insights go to die. If tunneling only happened in particle accelerators and high-energy labs, it could be ignored. But it doesn't. It's everywhere. It's part of the way the sun shines, because the nuclear fusion that powers our star shouldn't happen as efficiently as it does without tunneling. It's embedded in the way chemistry works. Without it, the molecules in your body would behave differently. You are, right now, alive in part because the universe cheats. So why, exactly, do we keep pretending we can't? The gap between a scientific curiosity and a life strategy closes when you stop treating human goals and challenges as separate from the natural order. The same laws that govern the spin of an electron govern the flow of your life. Not metaphorically, but literally. You are matter. You are energy. You are subject to the same fundamental principles that let particles slip through barriers. When you ignore that connection, you trap yourself in the slow lane. You limit yourself to methods of advancement that belong to a world where progress is only mechanical, a brick-by-brick climb up the wall. When you embrace that connection, you start noticing patterns and possibilities that others never see. Think about it. The classical approach to a barrier says, calculate the force you need to apply and push. The quantum approach says, exist in a state where pushing is irrelevant because you're already where you want to be. In the lab, that means manipulating the probability amplitude of a particle so that the forbidden zone isn't so forbidden. In your life, that means manipulating your own conditions, mental, emotional, behavioral, so that being on the far side of the obstacle becomes a statistical certainty rather than a long-shot hope. But here's the catch. Tunneling isn't random magic. It's not a particle just getting lucky. In physics, the probability of tunneling depends on measurable variables. The barrier's height, its thickness, and the particle's properties. Change those variables and you change the likelihood of the jump. Translate that into your own reality, and the lesson is clear. If you want to tunnel past your limits, you have to work on those variables in your life. The height of a barrier might be the degree of resistance in your environment, bureaucracy, opposition, market conditions. The thickness might be the number of layers between you and your result, layers of skill gaps, connections you lack, systems you haven't accessed yet. Your particle properties are your mindset, your focus, your willingness to exist as the version of yourself that already lives beyond the wall. In the lab, lowering the barrier or sharpening the particle's characteristics changes the odds. In life, the same principle applies. You don't just wish for a miracle. You change the parameters so the miracle becomes inevitable. And this is where the science trick becomes a philosophy of action. You stop thinking of your progress as linear effort and start thinking of it as probability engineering. Every decision you make is a shift in your wave function, expanding or contracting the chances of finding yourself on the other side of whatever's in front of you. This is not about reckless shortcuts. In physics, tunneling still obeys laws. It's not chaos. The particle that tunnels is still behaving according to the structure of the universe. It's just using a path most observers don't expect. The same is true for you. You can bypass years of grind without breaking a single rule of cause and effect, but only if you learn to work with the deeper rules most people never see. And here's why this is so important. The conventional mindset about limits is built on the assumption that cause and effect must be local, immediate, and linear. You put in effort here, you get a result there proportional to the work. Tunneling shows that cause and effect can be non-local, probabilistic, and nonlinear. A change in your state can cause a shift in outcomes without any visible intermediate steps. If you understand that, you stop obsessing over whether you've done enough yet and start focusing on whether your current state is one that allows the crossing to happen. This is why quantum tunneling is more than a science trick. It's a direct challenge to the narrative that slow, steady, linear progress is the only legitimate form of progress. Nature disagrees. Nature says, the leap is real, it's possible, and it happens all the time. Your job is to figure out the conditions under which it will happen for you. Next, we will shift from this broad connection between lab physics and personal reality to the even stranger truth. Particles don't just break our rules once in a while, they seem to live in a way that makes breaking them inevitable. And if you can learn why, you can start breaking the rules of your own limitations with the same certainty. If you were raised to believe that the universe is a rule-bound, orderly system, then quantum tunneling is a scandal. It looks like nature committing an act of quiet rebellion, slipping out the back door while classical physics isn't looking. But here's the thing, particles don't treat it as rebellion. For them, this isn't breaking the rules. This is the rules. From our human perspective, a wall is a wall. You're on one side, you don't have the means to cross, so you stay put. From a particle's perspective, the wall is just a region where its presence is less probable, not impossible. If there's any non-zero probability of existing beyond the barrier, that's enough. Over time, that possibility will be realized. And this difference in perspective is everything. Humans tend to categorize limits in binary terms, possible or impossible. If you believe something is impossible, you stop looking for ways to make it happen. The door is closed. You walk away. Particles don't do that. They understand, in the purely physical sense, that probabilities can be tiny and still real. They live in a constant readiness for those probabilities to manifest. Now imagine approaching your own barriers that way. Instead of saying, I don't have enough experience to get that role, or I don't have the money to start that project. You say, the probability is small right now, but it's not zero. My job is to keep existing in the state that allows it to happen, so that the moment the probability spikes, I'm already there. This is the quiet genius of quantum behavior, persistence without grind. The particle doesn't keep hammering the wall in frustration. It simply continues to exist in a way that maintains the potential for the jump. Stays ready. Most people exhaust themselves because they equate persistence with constant, visible action. They measure progress by how much effort they've applied today. The quantum perspective measures progress by the integrity of your state. Are you still aligned with the version of yourself on the other side? This is why particles make the leap without drama. They're not waiting in the way humans wait. They're existing in both possibilities at once until one resolves into reality. So how do you bring that into your own life? You start by rejecting the binary mindset about possibility. You train yourself to hold space for outcomes that aren't here yet but are still real in the probability field. This is not fantasy. In physics, the probability field is quantifiable. In life, it's observable in the opportunities, coincidences, and sudden openings that appear when you maintain a coherent state. The problem is, most people collapse their own probability wave prematurely. They declare something impossible and kill it in their own mind before reality ever has the chance to prove them wrong. Particles don't self-sabotage like that. When you think this way, you stop treating small probabilities as not worth it and start treating them as the seeds of transformation. You understand that every massive leap was once an improbability, until someone or something stayed in the right state long enough for it to happen. In this way, you're not fighting the barrier, you're outlasting its ability to remain the only reality. And here's where the magic happens. When you live like this, the environment around you starts rearranging. People appear who open doors. Information comes to you without you seeking it. Events line up in ways that seem lucky, but are simply the result of you keeping the window open long enough for probability to flow through. This is why you can and should adopt the tunneling mindset. Not because you're forcing reality to break for you, but because you're living in alignment with the deeper rules it's already following. Next, we will stop talking about barriers in abstract terms and start mapping them. We'll name the invisible wall between you and what you want, and more importantly, we'll start calculating what your personal wave function would need to look like to pass through it. Every person alive right now is standing in front of a wall. You may not see it, but it's there. It's not made of bricks or steel. It has no address. You can't take a photo of it. Yet it stops you with the same certainty as a locked door. This wall is the barrier between where you are and the life you say you want. And the most dangerous thing about it is how easy it is to mistake it for reality itself. For some people, the wall is money. They think, if I had more capital, more resources, I'd already be where I want to be. For others, it's knowledge. I need another degree, more training, more experience. For others, it's time. I have too many obligations, too many demands to move forward. But here's the truth. Those aren't the wall. Those are just the decorations on its surface. The real wall is the belief that those things are absolute conditions for crossing over. If you believe a certain amount of money is the only way through, you've already locked yourself into one narrow path. If you believe a certain credential is the only ticket in, you've already agreed to wait until it's in your hand. If you believe time is the only ingredient, you've already surrendered years before the game even begins. This is where the quantum tunneling perspective becomes more than theory. A barrier is only as solid as your agreement with it. In physics, a particle agrees to be stopped if its wave function collapses before it reaches the far side. In life, you agree to be stopped when you accept that the terms you've been given are the only terms available. Most people never challenge that agreement. They walk up to the wall, press their hand against it, feel the resistance, and step back. Then they spend years pacing in front of it, telling themselves they'll return one day when they're stronger, richer, more prepared. But quantum tunneling says, stop pacing. The wall is not the monolith you think it is. It's an energy threshold, and thresholds can be crossed without scaling the whole thing. So what does your wall look like right now? It's not enough to say, I feel stuck. You have to name it. Be precise. Is it a lack of visibility in your field? Is it the perception that someone else holds the keys to the opportunities you want? Is it the belief that your skills aren't there yet? Once you've named it, strip away its surface decoration. What's the actual function of this wall? Usually, it's filtering you based on a set of criteria, qualifications, relationships, resources. And if tunneling is possible, those criteria are negotiable in ways the traditional path never tells you. In physics, a barrier has dimensions, height, and thickness. In your life, a barrier has perceived difficulty and perceived distance. The higher the difficulty, the more energy it seems to require. The greater the distance, the more time it appears to demand. Your first move is to stop treating those numbers as fixed. Difficulty can be lowered by finding angles others overlook. Distance can be shortened by changing the medium you move through, the same way a particle's probability field shortens the effective width of the barrier. Here's something critical. The wall isn't static. It responds to your state. In the quantum world, a particle with higher energy has a better chance of tunneling. In the personal world, a person with higher clarity, emotional intensity, and decisiveness sees openings others miss. The barrier thins under certain states of being. So if you feel like you've been pressing against an unyielding wall for years, it's not necessarily because the wall is invincible. It may be because you've been approaching it from a state that keeps it dense and opaque. Your wave function in this analogy is your combined presence, your beliefs, your focus, your actions, your emotional tone. If that wave function barely extends into the space beyond the wall, your odds of crossing are low. But if your wave function saturates the far side, meaning you've invested enough energy into being that version of yourself now, the odds shift dramatically. That's when you stop seeing the wall as an obstacle and start seeing it as a filter you can slip through. And here's where it gets interesting. Once you cross, you realize the wall wasn't actually blocking everyone equally. It was selective. It was filtering out those who approached it conventionally, while letting through those whose probability field overlapped with the far side. The people you thought had broken the rules weren't lucky. They were operating from a different state. This is why your first real task in tunneling past limits is to stop treating your wall as a solid fact and start treating it as a negotiable condition. Next, we will dismantle the last piece of conditioning that keeps most people climbing slowly. The belief that linear progress is the only legitimate path. You've seen the wall for what it is. Now you'll see why step-by-step progress is not only unnecessary, but often the worst way forward. For centuries, human achievement has been measured in straight lines. Education follows a sequence. Careers follow a ladder. Skill building follows incremental stages. We've built entire cultures on the idea that the right way to reach any goal is one step at a time. And yet, the universe doesn't work that way. Look at the way particles move through space. They don't politely trace out a continuous path from one place to another. At the quantum scale, They jump from one state to another without occupying the in-between in any measurable way. They don't grind. They don't climb. They don't march in neat formation. The universe's most fundamental processes happen in leaps. And when you try to model your progress after a slow, linear grind, you're fighting the natural efficiency of the system you're part of. Linear progress assumes proportionality. If it takes you 1 year to go from step 1 to step 2, it will take another year to go from step 2 to step 3. It assumes that growth and achievement are a direct function of time and effort. But tunneling shows that proportionality is an illusion. The relationship between time, effort, and result is not fixed, it's elastic. You can compress years into moments when you operate under the right conditions. Here's why this matters. Most people waste enormous amounts of energy maintaining a linear pace because they believe it's the only way to prove their success is real. They think shortcuts cheapen the result. They think bypassing steps is unethical or undeserved. They think the grind is a rite of passage. Nature disagrees. A particle that tunnels doesn't send an apology to the barrier. It doesn't worry about skipping the proper process. It simply exists in a state where the outcome is realized sooner. Efficiency is not cheating. Efficiency is alignment with the way reality actually works. When you drop the assumption that your path must be linear, something radical happens. You stop designing your actions around sequence and start designing them around state. You focus less on what's the next step and more on what's the state that makes the leap inevitable. In a linear model, missing a step is fatal. In a tunneling model, missing a step is irrelevant if you've already arrived at the destination state. Think about the difference between learning a language by memorizing vocabulary lists versus immersing yourself in an environment where you must speak it to survive. The first is linear, the second is tunneling. One follows a predetermined sequence. The other throws you into the state where fluency happens faster. In every domain, business, art, personal transformation, there are immersion points where the conditions of the end state surround you before you deserve them. Those points are your tunneling opportunities. And here's the part that will challenge everything you've been taught. Many of the steps in the linear path are there not because they're necessary, but because they're traditional. They exist to regulate access, to slow you down, to keep the system orderly. That's fine for the system. It's not fine for you. If your goal is to align with the most efficient route nature offers, you have to be willing to ignore steps that don't directly alter your probability field. In physics, tunneling probability rises exponentially when the barrier is thin and your wave function is strong. In life, efficiency rises exponentially when the unnecessary layers between you and the outcome are stripped away and your state is deeply aligned with that outcome. That's why linear progress is not just inefficient. It's often a way of delaying the leap indefinitely. People who follow the proper sequence can spend decades without ever reaching the other side, because their state never matches the destination. Once you internalize this, you start seeking conditions, not steps. You look for situations that mimic the environment of your desired reality. You put yourself in proximity to people, places, and pressures that force you to operate as if you're already there. You collapse the sequence into a single leap. And when you do, you join the natural rhythm of the universe, the rhythm of jumps, not climbs. Next, we will turn our attention to the most intriguing part of this pattern: how the universe gets away with breaking its own apparent rules again and again, and how you can do the same without facing resistance from reality itself. If you've ever been taught that the laws of nature are absolute, quantum tunneling should make you uneasy. Here is a process that seems to thumb its nose at the traditional rulebook. According to classical physics, a barrier too high for a particle to climb is an impassable wall. According to quantum reality, it's a suggestion at best. But how does the universe pull this off without tearing itself apart? How can it break rules and still remain consistent, predictable, and orderly enough for stars to shine, planets to orbit, and life to exist? The short answer is this: the rules aren't broken at all. They just operate on levels most people never see. Classical physics is like a local traffic law. It works within a certain range of conditions, for a certain scale of reality. Quantum physics is like the deeper legal system that governs not just one street, but the entire nation. A car might obey the speed limit on a city road, But in certain contexts, say on a racetrack with different rules, that speed limit no longer applies. It's not chaos, it's jurisdiction. When a particle tunnels, it's not cheating in the moral sense. It's simply operating under the jurisdiction of the deeper laws that govern probability, energy distribution, and wave functions. From our perspective, it looks like a loophole. From the universe's perspective, it's just business as usual. This is the key insight. The universe has multiple layers of rules. The layer you see every day, the one that says hard work leads to gradual results, is real, but it's not the whole story. Beneath it are principles that allow for sudden shifts, nonlinear outcomes, and leaps that seem impossible from the surface view. Those deeper principles are not optional. They're just less visible. And when you know how to work at that level, you stop trying to muscle your way through the surface rules and start aligning with the deeper framework that allows the leap. Here's how this plays out in your life. On the classical layer, you might think, I can't get this opportunity unless I've met all the conventional requirements. That's the surface rule. On the deeper layer, the real law might be, if I can get my state, my connections, and my positioning to match what's required beyond the barrier, the opportunity will align regardless of sequence. This doesn't mean ignoring effort. It means directing effort toward the variables that influence probability, not toward rituals that only make sense within the slower system. The universe is not sentimental about process. It doesn't require that a particle earn its crossing through a barrier by accumulating enough energy in a straight line. It only cares that the conditions for crossing are met. The rest is irrelevant. When you start living by this, you'll notice something strange. People around you will think you've gotten away with something. They'll wonder how you bypassed the steps. They'll assume you had some unfair advantage. But in reality, you'll have simply stopped limiting yourself to the surface layer of rules. Think of it like this: two players are in the same game. One is playing only by the visible mechanics, button presses, scoring points, moving across the map. The other understands the hidden systems, where the hidden shortcuts are how the AI behaves, what triggers certain events. The second player moves faster not because they break the game, but because they understand the game better. That's tunneling in action. And here's the most liberating part. Operating under the deeper rules doesn't require permission. The particle doesn't need the barrier's consent to tunnel. It doesn't file a request. It just exists in a way that makes the crossing inevitable. You have the same option. But you can only use that option if you can stop obsessing over the surface story of how things should work. You have to be willing to look strange, to seem unpredictable, to make moves that don't make sense to those who are still stuck in the classical model. And when you do, you'll discover the deeper truth. The universe isn't breaking its own rules. It's following the real ones. The only difference is that you're finally playing on the same level. Next, we will take this understanding of deeper rules and connect it to something far more personal. The idea that luck is not random at all. It can be engineered just as tunneling probability can be increased, and the math of the universe proves it. We've all heard someone say, they just got lucky. It's the standard explanation for unexpected success. Someone lands the perfect opportunity. Someone meets the right person at the right time. Someone gets a break that changes everything. From the outside, it looks like chance. From the inside, if you understand tunneling, it looks like probability management. In quantum mechanics, tunneling is not random in the purest sense. It's probabilistic. That means while we can't predict the exact moment a particle will tunnel, we can calculate the likelihood that it will happen under certain conditions. Those conditions can be altered. Raise the particle's energy, reduce the barrier's thickness, and the probability spikes. This is the exact opposite of randomness. It's sensitivity to state. And that's exactly what so-called luck is in human life. From the outside, it looks unpredictable. From the inside, it's a byproduct of your state interacting with your environment. Change your state and you change the odds of luck finding you. Let's translate this. In life, your energy is not measured in electron volts. It's measured in clarity, commitment, and readiness. When you're clear on your outcome, fully committed to it, and operating as if it's already a fact, your probability field changes. You notice opportunities you would have missed. You say yes to things you would have hesitated on. You take actions that others call risky but are, in your model, inevitable. The barrier's thickness might be the number of obstacles between you and your desired reality, skill gaps, bureaucratic processes, social hierarchies. Many of these can be reduced, bypassed, or reframed so they no longer act as solid obstructions. Every reduction increases your tunneling probability, and with it, the appearance of luck. This is why lucky people seem to experience a cluster of fortunate events, while unlucky people face repeated setbacks. It's not cosmic favoritism, it's probability clustering. Once your conditions match those favorable to crossing one barrier, you're often in position to cross several in rapid succession. Physics calls this resonance. When the conditions are right, small inputs produce big effects. In your life, resonance happens when your internal state matches multiple potential outcomes at once. Suddenly, the improbable becomes common. And here's the real kicker. Most people's probability field is set by default, shaped by habits, fears, and beliefs they never question. They walk through life in a low-energy state with thick, rigid barriers all around them, then call it bad luck when nothing breaks in their favor. A tunneling mindset does the opposite. It asks, how can I raise my state so my field overlaps more often with the outcomes I want? How can I thin the barriers by reframing or bypassing obstacles others treat as fixed? How can I position myself so that when the improbable occurs, I'm already ready to catch it? Once you start doing this, the results compound. You don't just get one lucky break, you get a chain reaction. One crossing puts you in range of another and another. This is why breakthroughs often seem to come all at once after years of stagnation. It's not magic. It's the math of probability finally tipping in your favor. The beauty of this is that you don't need to know when the next opportunity will arrive. You just need to keep your state tuned so that when it does, you're already aligned with it. That's how particles behave, and it's why their miracles are built into the system. Next, we will take this idea of probability fields and push it even further into the strange world of wave functions, and how the shape of your personal probability field can be shifted to make outcomes inevitable instead of rare. In quantum mechanics, the wave function is the master key. It's the mathematical description of all the possible states a particle could be in. Before you measure it, the particle doesn't choose. It exists in a cloud of probabilities, spread out over space and possibility. That spread, that distribution, is its potential field. And here's where things get fascinating. The particle's potential field isn't just an abstract calculation. It dictates where the particle is most likely to be found, how it moves, and whether it can slip past a barrier that should stop it cold. Now take that concept out of the physics textbook and lay it over your life. You also have a potential field. It's not measured in nanometers or expressed in mathematical symbols, but it's just as real. It's the range of outcomes your current state makes possible. Your wave function is the sum of your beliefs, your habits, your skills, your focus, your emotional energy, and the context you put yourself in. Together, they determine the map of probabilities for your life. In some regions of that map, the probability is dense. Those are the outcomes you're most likely to experience. In other regions, the probability is faint, rare, but not impossible. Most people live with a narrow, tightly concentrated potential field. They occupy the same routines, think the same thoughts, socialize with the same types of people, and take the same types of actions day after day. Their probability map barely changes. The same patterns repeat, and they think that's just the way life is. But a particle's wave function can be broadened, reshaped, intensified. And so can yours. If you want to tunnel past a limit, you don't start by hammering at the wall. You start by altering your potential field so that the other side becomes part of the space where you naturally exist. Once your wave function spills beyond the wall, the jump becomes inevitable. So how do you reshape your personal wave function? First, you change your inputs. A particle's probability distribution depends on its energy and its environment. Your probability distribution depends on the energy you carry, mental, emotional, physical, and the environment you place yourself in. New environments expose you to new variables, which shift your map of possible outcomes. Second, you change your pattern of observation. In physics, observation collapses the wave function. It forces a choice among the possibilities. In your life, what you pay attention to repeatedly becomes more probable. Focus is a form of measurement, and measurement shapes reality. Third, you change your baseline identity. Your wave function is anchored by who you believe you are. When that identity shifts, when you start acting, speaking, and making decisions as if you already exist in the post-barrier reality, the potential field reorganizes to match. Here's the subtle part. Reshaping your potential field doesn't guarantee an instant leap. Just as in physics, reshaping a wave function doesn't guarantee tunneling in the next moment. But it changes the odds in your favor, and the longer you sustain that state, the more certain the leap becomes. When your potential field overlaps heavily with the far side of the barrier, you stop thinking about if it will happen and start preparing for when. This is why the wave function metaphor is so powerful. It turns the idea of possibility into something measurable in your own experience. You can feel when your field is narrow. Life feels repetitive, predictable, stagnant. You can feel when it's wide. Life feels dynamic, full of coincidences and near misses that hint at something about to break through. Your job isn't to micromanage the exact moment of the leap. Your job is to keep widening and saturating your field until the other side is part of your normal probability range. Once you understand this, the barrier stops feeling solid. It becomes a region of lower probability, not impossibility. And that shift in perception alone is enough to start thinning it. Next, we will explore another quantum principle that's just as strange and just as applicable, the observer effect, and how the very act of paying attention to your life changes the outcomes available to you. In the quantum world, there's a peculiar fact that unsettles even the most seasoned physicists. The act of observation changes the system being observed. A particle that exists in a cloud of probabilities will choose a definite state when measured. Before the measurement, it is many possibilities at once. After the measurement, it is one specific outcome. This is called the observer effect, and it is not just a lab curiosity. In your life, you are both the particle and the observer. The events, opportunities, and outcomes around you exist in a kind of probability field until you measure them with your attention. What you repeatedly observe and the way you observe it influences the reality that solidifies around you. If you constantly measure your situation through the lens of scarcity, lack, and limitation, you collapse your possibilities into outcomes that match that measurement. If you measure through the lens of opportunity, abundance, and progress, you collapse into outcomes that match those. This is not about blind optimism. In physics, observation doesn't magically improve the particle's state. It simply defines it. In life, observation defines your active reality. It determines what becomes real to you out of the countless possibilities that could have taken form. And here's the kicker. Most people measure their reality unconsciously. They wake up and scan for problems, for threats, for reasons to doubt. They don't realize that in doing so, they're reinforcing the exact states they wish would change. If you want to shift your life toward tunneling past a barrier, you have to change the way you observe. This doesn't mean ignoring challenges. It means observing them from a state that includes the solution. In physics, the measuring device has to be tuned to detect the particle in a certain state. In your life, your measuring device is your mindset, and it has to be tuned to detect the version of events where you're already moving past the wall. Observation also works on yourself. The way you pay attention to your own actions changes the trajectory you take. Watch yourself as someone stuck, and you reinforce being stuck. Watch yourself as someone in transition toward the other side, and you reinforce that transition. And here's something few people realize. Observation doesn't have to be external. Internal observation, self-awareness, is just as powerful. When you notice your own thought patterns, emotional states, and behaviors without judgment, you create space for them to shift. That space is where new probabilities enter. In tunneling terms, observation is the act of keeping your wave function from collapsing too soon into the I can't state. You hold it open, keep the range of possibilities alive, and allow time for the improbable but desired outcome to solidify. This is why awareness is a strategic skill, not just a spiritual one. The better you are at observing without prematurely locking in a limiting reality, the more openings you have for breakthroughs. Next, we will take this principle to its ultimate application. Collapsing the wave on purpose, deliberately choosing which reality becomes the one you live before it happens. A particle's wave function contains every possibility available to it at a given moment. Left unmeasured, those possibilities remain open, a shimmering cloud of potential. The instant the particle is measured, the wave function collapses into a single definite outcome. That collapse is not random. It's governed by the probabilities encoded in the wave function before the measurement, which means the collapse can be influenced, not in the moment of measurement, but in the way the wave function is shaped beforehand. This is the core of conscious creation in quantum terms. You don't wait for reality to happen to you. You shape the field so that when it collapses into the reality you've already aligned yourself with. For most people, life is a series of unplanned collapses. They move through their days with their probability field set by habit, fear, and default patterns. Then when the moment of choice arrives, an opportunity, a crisis, a decision point, their reality collapses into something predictable and familiar. If you want to live differently, you have to make those collapses intentional. The first step is clarity. A wave function with a wide spread of unfocused probabilities will collapse into whatever is most normal for your current state. If you want a specific outcome, you have to saturate your probability field with conditions that make that outcome the most probable option. That means thinking, acting, and deciding in alignment with it now, not later. The second step is emotional coherence. Probability isn't influenced by logic alone. Your emotions are part of your state, and they either reinforce or contradict the outcome you want. A mind that says, "I'm going there," while a heart says, "I don't believe it," creates a scrambled signal. A weak wave function that defaults to the old state when collapse comes. The third step is environmental tuning. In physics, external fields can influence a particle's probability distribution. In life, your environment, the people, information, and stimuli you immerse yourself in will either strengthen or dilute the state you're maintaining. When all three, clarity, coherence, and environment, are aligned, your probability field becomes biased toward the desired reality. Then when measurement occurs, when a situation forces a definite outcome, it's not luck that determines the result. It's the groundwork you've already laid. This is what choosing your reality before it happens really means. You're not forcing the universe to bend in the moment. You're preparing your state so thoroughly that the collapse can only go one way. And here's the profound part. This doesn't just apply to big, dramatic moments. Every small decision, every tiny interaction, is a micro-collapse of your personal wave function. Most people treat these as inconsequential, but they add up, they determine the shape of the bigger collapses to come, which means you can practice. Every day you can choose small outcomes intentionally, shaping the way your field collapses over and over until it's second nature. Then, when the high-stakes collapse comes, you're ready. In tunneling, collapse isn't about effort, it's about inevitability. The particle doesn't strain to appear on the far side. The conditions of its wave function make that appearance the natural result. In your life, the leap works the same way. The wall doesn't need to crumble. The probability just needs to be stacked until your being on the other side is the only logical resolution. Next, we will take this understanding of collapse and look at the moment it actually happens. That strange instant when nothing seems to change, and then suddenly everything has. Quantum tunneling is not dramatic in real time. You don't watch a particle climb, strain, or break through. One moment it's here, the next it's there. There's no visible transition in between. That's because tunneling doesn't operate in the same space-time sequence we're used to. It bypasses the intermediate steps entirely. From a classical perspective, it's as if the particle simply teleports. And this is exactly what makes the moment so strange in human experience. When you're working toward a goal in the linear model, you expect to see progress markers. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. You expect the climb to be visible. But when you tunnel, the before and after are clear, yet the crossing itself feels almost invisible. In practice, this often shows up as a period of apparent stillness. You've been saturating your probability field, aligning your state, doing the work, but on the surface, nothing changes. To the outside world, it might look like you're stalled. Even to yourself, it can feel like waiting. But beneath that stillness, the conditions for tunneling are aligning. The wave function is extended deep into the space beyond the barrier. The measurement moment hasn't come yet, but the outcome is already tilting in your favor. Then, seemingly without warning, the measurement occurs. A decision is made, an offer arrives, a door opens, and you are suddenly on the other side. The people watching call it sudden. You know it wasn't. This is the paradox of tunneling. It's instantaneous in the moment, but prepared for over time. The leap looks abrupt only to those who didn't see the slow, invisible shaping of the wave function beforehand. Recognizing this pattern is critical because many people give up during the stillness phase. They assume that if they can't see movement, nothing is happening. They abandon the state they've been maintaining. Their wave function retracts, their probability drops, and when the measurement moment comes, they collapse back into the old reality. To master tunneling, you have to become comfortable with that stillness, to trust that the absence of visible progress doesn't mean absence of progress. It means you're holding the line, letting the conditions mature. This is also why patience is not passive in the tunneling model. Patience is active maintenance of state. You don't wait in a vacuum. You hold yourself in alignment, keep your field saturated, and remain ready for the collapse to go your way. And when it does, the transition is clean. There's no scramble, no partial arrival, no exhausting climb. You're simply there. The old state is behind you, the new state is real, and there is no going back. From here, the question becomes, once you've experienced that leap, how do you replicate it? How do you make tunneling a repeatable process, not a one-off miracle? Next, we will examine how particles routinely appear where they shouldn't be, and how you can design your life so that you're regularly found in places that defy the old rules. In the classical view of the world, things stay where they belong unless a clear cause moves them. A ball rolls because you pushed it. A rocket travels because you gave it fuel. If you didn't apply enough force, it doesn't get there. Quantum tunneling destroys that neat logic. A particle without enough energy to cross a barrier will, by every classical calculation, remain confined to its side. Yet when you measure, you sometimes find it beyond the wall, as if it had been placed there by some invisible hand. The truth is stranger. The particle has always been partially there in probability terms, and under the right conditions, that faint presence becomes reality. This is why tunneling is so unsettling to our everyday reasoning. It implies that location, and by extension limitation, is not absolute. In the quantum world, being somewhere is not binary. It's a matter of degree, a matter of likelihood. And that means being in an impossible place is never truly impossible. Now translate that to your life. When someone says you shouldn't be in a certain position, too inexperienced for the role, too new to the field, too under-resourced for the opportunity, they're speaking in classical terms. They're looking at your visible energy and concluding you can't cross the barrier. They don't realize your probability field may already extend into that territory. This is why some breakthroughs seem to shock everyone but the person experiencing them. From the outside, it looks like a leap with no preparation. From the inside, it feels inevitable because you've been occupying that space in probability for a long time. It might have started as the faintest overlap. Occasional thoughts, small aligned actions, brief experiences of the desired state. Over time, you strengthen that overlap, deepening the presence of your wave function on the far side. Eventually, the shouldn't transformed into is. This is not about ignoring qualifications or bypassing growth. It's about realizing that your presence in a space can be established before your physical arrival. You build your identity, your connections, your alignment with that reality until the day comes when measurement reveals you've been there all along. You just hadn't been seen there yet. In physics, the tunneling particle is not teleported in the science fiction sense. It doesn't disappear here and reappear there through magic. Its probability has been leaking through the barrier the whole time. The moment you detect it beyond the wall is simply the moment its presence becomes definite. In life, the same thing happens. You leak into your desired reality through conversations, practice, immersion, and decision-making that matches the other side's norms. People there start to recognize you as part of their world. Opportunities start aligning with you, until eventually the shift is official, and everyone else wonders how you appeared where you shouldn't be. This is why you must ignore those who define possibility solely by visible credentials, timelines, and sequences. They are blind to probability. They don't see you on the far side until it's undeniable, and by then, the leap has already happened. Next, we will take this phenomenon and expand it into a strategy for your own transformation, using the idea of arriving without traveling to move your goals out of the grind of sequential progress and into the leap zone. When you watch a particle tunnel in theory, it feels like teleportation. One moment it's here, the next moment it's there, and the in-between is absent. In human terms, that kind of jump feels like magic. But as with all tunneling, the magic is just the surface view. Underneath, there's a structure. And if you understand it, you can make those leaps happen deliberately. Teleporting a goal means arriving at it without the grind of traveling every intermediate step. In a linear model, you'd plot out the sequence from here to there. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and so on. Each step is visible, measurable, and time-consuming. In the tunneling model, you start by saturating your probability field with the end state, acting, deciding, and structuring your environment as if you're already there. You don't ignore the intermediate steps entirely. You render them irrelevant by making the destination state more probable than the current one. This is where most people misunderstand quantum leaps. They think it means skipping the work. It doesn't. It means redirecting the work toward aligning with the endpoint, not climbing toward it. That alignment creates the conditions for collapse. And when it comes, the transition is instantaneous in experience. For example, if your goal is to operate at the level of a certain type of leader, the linear model says, earn certain titles, spend a certain number of years, accumulate the proper sequence of credentials. The tunneling model says, begin now to operate in the mindset, decision-making style, and network of that leader, so consistently that your probability field overlaps fully with that reality. Then, when the measurement moment comes, a role opens, a choice is offered, you don't apply for the leap. You're already standing in it. This works because probability doesn't care about your resume. It cares about your state. The universe isn't checking your history before it allows a collapse. It's checking your alignment in the present. The magic feeling comes from bypassing the visible chain of cause and effect. Outsiders expect to see your progress unfold step by step. When you arrive without traveling, it violates their map of how things happen. To them, it's sudden. To you, it's the next obvious frame in the film you've been living. The key to making this repeatable is to define your goals in terms of states, not milestones. Milestones belong to the linear world. States belong to the tunneling world. Ask, who am I in the post-goal state? What does my day look like there? What decisions am I making there that I'm not making here? Then start living those answers now. That's how you teleport without defying any real law, because you've already been there in probability long before it becomes physical fact. The more you do this, the less you'll be attached to the grind of step-by-step progress. You'll realize that some goals are best reached by inhabiting them until the universe has no choice but to match you to them. Next, we will tackle the subtle trap that can still catch you even once you understand all this. The illusion that barriers are real in a way that makes them solid, and why even measurable limits are more malleable than you've been taught. In the quantum world, a barrier is not the impenetrable wall it appears to be in classical physics. It's a region of lower probability. That's all. The mathematics treats it not as a solid, fixed thing, but as a filter that weakens the likelihood of finding a particle beyond it. And here's the fascinating part: you can measure that probability. You can calculate the odds of tunneling through based on the barrier's properties and the particle's own characteristics, which means even an impossible wall comes with numbers attached, not absolutes. This is where the illusion lies. In everyday life, we confuse high difficulty with impossibility. We mistake unlikely for unattainable. We treat probability as if anything less than 100% is zero. That's how most people get stuck. They see a barrier, a position that only one person in 100 gets, an income level few reach, a skill few master, and because the probability is low, they behave as if it's impossible. They walk away without even testing the field. Quantum mechanics says otherwise. A low probability event is still a possible event. And if you can influence the variables, raise your energy, thin the thickness of the barrier, You can shift the odds in your favor until the improbable becomes inevitable. The reason most people never try is because the barrier feels real. And in a sense, it is, but only as a statistical pattern, not as a law of nature. In your own life, think about what you've labeled as impossible. Is it really a hard, unchanging fact? Or is it a statistical pattern based on the way most people approach it? If it's the latter, then you're not up against physics, you're up against tradition, habit, and the default settings of the people around you. The beauty of probability is that it can be hacked. Just as a particle can tunnel with a higher likelihood under certain conditions, you can increase your odds of crossing a personal barrier by changing your state and approach. For example, if the barrier is breaking into a competitive field, the classical approach says, follow the expected steps, hope you outlast the competition. The tunneling approach says, identify the specific factors that make the barrier thick, lack of exposure, gatekeepers, skill scarcity, and strategically thin each one until your probability spikes. Once you start thinking in terms of measurable odds instead of absolutes, barriers lose their intimidation. They stop being brick walls and start being dynamic conditions you can influence. This is why the illusion is so powerful. People see a barrier and believe it's fixed. The truth is, the barrier's strength depends on context. Change the context and the barrier changes with it. Next, we will expose one of the most culturally reinforced illusions of all, the belief that you have to pay your dues before you can pass through. The idea that you must pay your dues before you deserve success is one of the most deeply ingrained pieces of cultural conditioning. It's presented as a moral truth. Work for years, suffer, prove your worth, and only then are you allowed to cross the barrier. But this belief is a social construct, not a law of the universe. Nature doesn't demand dues. The particle doesn't log hours against the barrier before tunneling through. It doesn't keep a tally of failed attempts until it's earned the right to cross. It simply crosses when the conditions align. This myth persists because it benefits the systems that depend on slow, predictable progression. Industries, institutions, and hierarchies are easier to manage when people accept that advancement must be gradual. The moment too many individuals realize that leaps are possible, the gatekeeping structures weaken. Paying your dues can sometimes be useful, if the time you spend genuinely builds the state you need to maintain success on the other side. But the way it's usually taught is wasteful. It has you following a rigid sequence that may have nothing to do with your actual readiness to leap. In the tunneling model, readiness is not about elapsed time. It's about alignment. If you have saturated your probability field with the conditions of the post-barrier state, there's no reason to delay the leap in order to satisfy an arbitrary quota of effort. This is why you'll see some people make rapid advances while others grind for years without breaking through. The former ignore the myth of dues and focus on shaping their state to match the goal. The latter cling to the idea that crossing is a reward given after enough toil. The danger of the dues mindset is that it conditions you to wait for permission. You start believing that success is something granted to you by the barrier's gatekeepers rather than something you claim by aligning yourself with the outcome. The tunneling mindset reclaims that agency. You stop asking, have I done enough yet? And start asking, am I in the state that makes the leap inevitable? When you adopt this, you'll notice that some opportunities appear before you feel ready by traditional standards. In the dues model, you decline them, thinking you haven't earned them yet. In the tunneling model, you recognize them as measurement moments, the points where your wave function collapses into the new reality. This is why ignoring the dues myth is not reckless, it's strategic. You're not skipping the growth you need, you're discarding the growth you don't. Once you see this clearly, you can never unsee it. The barrier is no longer a moral test of endurance. It's just a condition you can meet now rather than later. Next, we will shift into building the inner mechanics for your own quantum jump, starting with energy states and why operating at ground level keeps you locked in the slow lane. In quantum mechanics, a particle's ability to tunnel depends heavily on its energy state. A particle at low energy is far less likely to cross a barrier than one at higher energy. Raise the energy, and suddenly what seemed improbable becomes almost routine. In human life, your energy state plays the same role. It determines whether you have enough probability overlap with the reality on the far side of your barrier to make the leap. And here's the truth most people miss. They spend their entire lives operating at ground level. Ground level is survival mode. It's the state where your energy is spent on maintaining what you already have, paying the bills, meeting obligations, putting out fires. It's functional, but it leaves little to no surplus for leaps. The problem is, if you stay at ground level, the odds of tunneling are slim. You might want the leap, but you don't have the energetic bandwidth to sustain the state that allows it. In physics, giving a particle more energy might mean increasing its velocity or putting it in an external field. In your life, it means increasing your clarity, vitality, and emotional intensity toward the target state. It's about creating a surplus of focus and commitment that can be invested in conditions beyond your immediate survival. Raising your energy state isn't just about motivation. It's structural. It means identifying the drains that keep you at ground level and cutting them off. Mental drains, looping thoughts, constant self-doubt, distraction. Emotional drains, toxic relationships, unresolved resentment, chronic fear. Physical drains, poor health habits, low rest, neglect of recovery. Each of these is like friction on a particle. Reduce the friction, and the same input of effort produces far greater movement. Once you have surplus energy, you can direct it toward building and sustaining the probability field for your leap. Without that surplus, you're always stuck in reaction mode, and reaction mode keeps you locked to the near side of the barrier. This is why people often have breakthroughs during periods of high emotional intensity or focused passion. The energy state spikes, the wave function swells, and the leap becomes likely. The tragedy is that they then let the energy drop back to ground level, and the momentum fades. The tunneling mindset treats energy management as a non-negotiable. You don't just wait for high-energy moments. You cultivate them deliberately. You create rituals, environments, and routines that keep your state elevated enough to make improbable events normal. In quantum terms, a higher energy state doesn't guarantee tunneling, but it increases the frequency of successful jumps. In life, the same is true. You might not leap every day, but you'll be in constant readiness when the collapse moment comes. Next, we will build on this foundation by exploring how to match the frequency of the version of yourself that has already crossed, and why this matching is the real key to making leaps seem effortless. Energy determines the strength of your probability field. Frequency determines its shape. In physics, frequency is tied to the oscillation of a wave, how often it cycles in a given period. In life, frequency can be thought of as the overall tone or resonance of your being, the combination of your mindset, emotional patterns, and behaviors. When your frequency matches the environment on the far side of the barrier, the leap is natural. When it doesn't, the leap feels forced or unstable, and even if you manage to cross, you may not stay there. Matching frequency is about aligning yourself with the you that already exists in the desired reality. That version of you thinks differently, moves differently, makes different decisions. They carry themselves with a certain energy, operate in a certain network, and see the world through a certain lens. To match frequency, you begin embodying those traits now. You don't wait until you arrive to adopt them, because the adopting is what makes arrival possible. The challenge is that most people match the frequency of their current state. They think, feel, and act in ways that reinforce the world they're already in. They visit the idea of their desired reality in short bursts, moments of visualization, or brief surges of confidence, but they spend the majority of their time resonating with the here and now version of themselves. That's like a particle spending 95% of its time in a low-energy, mismatched frequency and expecting to appear beyond the barrier. The overlap just isn't there. Frequency matching begins with awareness. You study the version of yourself beyond the barrier as if they are a real person, which, in the multiverse view of possibilities, they are. You identify how they think under pressure, what they prioritize, how they respond to challenges, what environments they inhabit. Then, you deliberately step into those patterns now, even in small ways. You take the actions they would take. You cut out the actions they would never tolerate. You change your speech, your surroundings, your habits to match theirs. First, this feels artificial. That's because your current frequency resists the shift. But as you maintain the new resonance, your probability field reshapes around it. The overlap with the far side grows, until the leap becomes not just possible but unavoidable. The beauty of frequency matching is that it works even when the leap is months or years away. Every day you spend in resonance with your post-barrier self strengthens the bridge between here and there. And when the measurement moment comes, collapse into that reality is the only outcome that makes sense. This is why leaps that look instant from the outside often feel steady from the inside. The person making the jump has been living in the destination frequency long before the physical shift occurred. Next, we will take this into the concept of probability fields themselves. How to expand the space where your desired outcomes live so the universe has more room to meet you there. In quantum mechanics, a particle's ability to tunnel depends heavily on its energy state. A particle at low energy is far less likely to cross a barrier than one at higher energy. Raise the energy, and suddenly what seemed improbable becomes almost routine. In human life, your energy state plays the same role. It determines whether you have enough probability overlap with the reality on the far side of your barrier to make the leap. And here's the truth most people miss. They spend their entire lives operating at ground level. Ground level is survival mode. It's the state where your energy is spent on maintaining what you already have, paying the bills, meeting obligations, putting out fires. It's functional, but it leaves little to no surplus for leaps. The problem is, if you stay at ground level, the odds of tunneling are slim. You might want the leap, but you don't have the energetic bandwidth to sustain the state that allows it. In physics, giving a particle more energy might mean increasing its velocity or putting it in an external field. In your life, it means increasing your clarity, vitality, and emotional intensity toward the target state. It's about creating a surplus of focus and commitment that can be invested in conditions beyond your immediate survival. Raising your energy state isn't just about motivation. It's structural. It means identifying the drains that keep you at ground level and cutting them off. Mental drains, looping thoughts, constant self-doubt, distraction. Emotional drains, toxic relationships, unresolved resentment, chronic fear. Physical drains, poor health habits, low rest, neglect of recovery. Each of these is like friction on a particle. Reduce the friction, and the same input of effort produces far greater movement. Once you have surplus energy, you can direct it toward building and sustaining the probability field for your leap. Without that surplus, you're always stuck in reaction mode, and reaction mode keeps you locked to the near side of the barrier. This is why people often have breakthroughs during periods of high emotional intensity or focused passion. The energy state spikes, the wave function swells, and the leap becomes likely. The tragedy is that they then let the energy drop back to ground level, and the momentum fades. The tunneling mindset treats energy management as a non-negotiable. You don't just wait for high-energy moments. You cultivate them deliberately. You create rituals, environments, and routines that keep your state elevated enough to make improbable events normal. In quantum terms, a higher energy state doesn't guarantee tunneling, but it increases the frequency of successful jumps. In life, the same is true. You might not leap every day, but you'll be in constant readiness when the collapse moment comes. Next, we will build on this foundation by exploring how to match the frequency of the version of yourself that has already crossed, and why this matching is the real key to making leaps seem effortless. Energy determines the strength of your probability field. Frequency determines its shape. In physics, frequency is tied to the oscillation of a wave, how often it cycles in a given period. In life, frequency can be thought of as the overall tone or resonance of your being, the combination of your mindset, emotional patterns, and behaviors. When your frequency matches the environment on the far side of the barrier, the leap is natural. When it doesn't, the leap feels forced or unstable, and even if you manage to cross, you may not stay there. Matching frequency is about aligning yourself with the you that already exists in the desired reality. That version of you thinks differently, moves differently, makes different decisions. They carry themselves with a certain energy, operate in a certain network, and see the world through a certain lens. To match frequency, you begin embodying those traits now. You don't wait until you arrive to adopt them, because the adopting is what makes arrival possible. The challenge is that most people match the frequency of their current state. They think, feel, and act in ways that reinforce the world they're already in. They visit the idea of their desired reality in short bursts, moments of visualization, or brief surges of confidence, but they spend the majority of their time resonating with the here and now version of themselves. That's like a particle spending 95% of its time in a low-energy, mismatched frequency and expecting to appear beyond the barrier. The overlap just isn't there. Frequency matching begins with awareness. You study the version of yourself beyond the barrier as if they are a real person, which, in the multiverse view of possibilities, they are. You identify how they think under pressure, what they prioritize, how they respond to challenges, what environments they inhabit. Then, you deliberately step into those patterns now, even in small ways. You take the actions they would take. You cut out the actions they would never tolerate. You change your speech, your surroundings, your habits to match theirs. First, this feels artificial. That's because your current frequency resists the shift. But as you maintain the new resonance, your probability field reshapes around it. The overlap with the far side grows, until the leap becomes not just possible but unavoidable. The beauty of frequency matching is that it works even when the leap is months or years away. Every day you spend in resonance with your post-barrier self strengthens the bridge between here and there. And when the measurement moment comes, collapse into that reality is the only outcome that makes sense. This is why leaps that look instant from the outside often feel steady from the inside. The person making the jump has been living in the destination frequency long before the physical shift occurred. Next, we will take this into the concept of probability fields themselves. How to expand the space where your desired outcomes live so the universe has more room to meet you there. In the quantum model, a particle's probability field describes all the places it could possibly be found. It's not infinite, it's defined by the particle's energy, the environment, and the barriers in its way. But crucially, the field isn't fixed, can be expanded. The wider the field, the more space there is for improbable but desirable events to occur. In tunneling, a wide field means the particle's presence extends well into the forbidden zone, so the chance of detection beyond the barrier rises sharply. Your life works the same way. You have a personal probability field, the range of outcomes your current state makes likely. The size of that field depends on your habits, skills, environment, network, mindset, and emotional state. Most people live inside a tight, cramped probability field. Their days are predictable, their interactions repetitive, their possibilities narrow. This smallness isn't fate. It's a result of unexamined patterns that keep them looping in the same limited range. Expanding your probability field is one of the fastest ways to increase the odds of tunneling into a new reality. And the process is not mysterious. It's a deliberate expansion of your exposure, capacity, and adaptability. Exposure means increasing the variety of inputs into your life. Meeting new people, entering unfamiliar spaces, exposing yourself to different information and experiences. Each new input reshapes your field, creating new possible intersections with opportunities. Capacity means building the skills, emotional resilience, and mental flexibility to operate in more environments. The more situations you can handle, the more potential scenarios your field can accommodate. Adaptability means reducing the friction of change. In physics, a wave function that adapts easily to its environment can sustain a wider spread. In life, the person who can adjust quickly is able to occupy more probability space without collapsing into old patterns. The expansion process is cumulative. Every time you stretch your field, you make it easier to stretch it again. Over time, the version of you that once occupied a tiny slice of possibility now exists across a vast range of potential outcomes. This isn't about scattering your energy randomly. It's about intentionally expanding in the directions that intersect with your desired state. In quantum terms, you want your field to saturate the far side of the barrier. In life, you want your expansion to saturate the conditions where your goal naturally exists. When your probability field is small, even a high-energy state may not create the leap you want. But when the field is wide, the odds of collapse into your desired outcome rise dramatically, even if the leap still seems improbable from the outside. And here's the subtle magic. Once your field is wide enough, the barrier starts to lose definition. It becomes harder to tell where here ends and there begins. By the time collapse occurs, it feels less like a jump and more like a shift in lighting. You're simply standing somewhere you always had a foot in. This is why your priority isn't to obsess over the moment of tunneling. It's to keep expanding your field until the leap is inevitable. Next, we will break the most misleading belief about possibility: that life's randomness controls your fate. You'll see that what we call chance is often nothing more than unrecognized probability, and that you can shape it. People love to attribute events to luck, good or bad, as if some cosmic roulette wheel is spinning above their heads. She just got lucky. He had bad luck. It's all a matter of chance. In reality, what we call luck is often just probability in disguise. And probability can be influenced. In quantum tunneling, the appearance of a particle beyond a barrier looks random if you're only watching outcomes. You see it succeed sometimes, fail others, and you can't predict the exact moment of success. But if you know the particle's energy, the barrier's dimensions, and the conditions of the system, you can predict, with stunning accuracy, the probability of success over time. From that perspective, randomness evaporates. There's no mystery. There's only the math. The same is true in life. If you zoom out and look at patterns over time, what seems like random luck usually aligns perfectly with a person's probability field. High-energy, wide-field individuals get lucky more often because their state intersects with more opportunities. Low-energy, narrow-field individuals get unlucky more often because their state intersects with fewer, and with more obstacles. The illusion of randomness persists because we tend to focus on isolated events rather than the conditions that produced them. We see the leap and ignore the months or years spent shaping the wave function for that leap. When you start paying attention to conditions instead of moments, you stop thinking of life as a slot machine. You see that outcomes are the natural result of the state you've been sustaining. The way to prove this to yourself is simple. Track your state and your outcomes over time. Watch how shifts in your clarity, energy, frequency, and field expansion correlate with changes in what randomly happens to you. You'll quickly find that good fortune clusters when you've been maintaining the right conditions, and setbacks cluster when you haven't. This doesn't mean you can predict every event with precision. Even in physics, probability doesn't give you exact moments, it gives you overwhelming trends. But those trends are enough to change your strategy. Instead of waiting for luck, you create it by raising your energy state so your probability field strengthens, matching the frequency of your desired reality so you have overlap with it, expanding your probability field so you can intersect with more possible opportunities, sustaining these conditions long enough for collapse moments to occur. When you operate this way, the line between chance and certainty blurs. What others call random becomes, for you, predictable in its inevitability. This shift is liberating because it ends the passive mindset. You no longer sit around hoping for the right break. You understand that breaks are the result of math you control. Next, we will take this control even further by learning how to align with the path of least resistance, so tunneling becomes your default mode of moving through life. In physics, the path of least resistance is not a lazy path, it's the natural one. Systems tend toward configurations that require the least energy to sustain. Water flows downhill not because it's weak, but because gravity and the terrain make that the most efficient route. Quantum tunneling follows the same principle. A particle doesn't hammer against the thickest part of a barrier. Its probability field seeps into the thinner regions, the points where the resistance is lowest, and that's where the leap most often occurs. In life, we're conditioned to think that the harder the path, the more valuable the outcome. We're told to seek challenges, to push through difficulty, to distrust anything that comes easily. And yet, nature doesn't operate that way. It doesn't value struggle for its own sake. It values efficiency. If your goal is to leap past a barrier, aligning with the path of least resistance isn't avoidance, it's strategy. This begins with mapping your barrier. Every obstacle has weak points, areas where fewer layers of complexity exist, moments when external conditions temporarily lower the threshold, contexts in which your own strengths are maximized. Your job is to identify these and position yourself accordingly. Just as a particle's tunneling probability spikes where the barrier is thin, your probability spikes where alignment between your state and the environment is strongest. The problem is, most people ignore these thin spots because they're obsessed with proving they can break through the toughest part of the wall. They measure worth by difficulty instead of outcome. This is how people waste years grinding when they could have tunneled. Aligning with least resistance requires a shift in thinking. You start asking, where is my desired outcome already closer than it appears? What environments naturally lower the barrier between me and that reality? Which of my traits, skills, or connections can be leveraged to thin the wall? The answers to these questions reveal pathways where effort produces disproportionate results, not because you're cheating, but because you're cooperating with the structure of the barrier. This is the opposite of passivity. You're not sitting back and hoping the wall crumbles. You're actively scanning for the points where the least input creates the biggest opening. You're reading the terrain like water reads a mountainside. When you align this way, leaps feel smoother. You conserve energy, avoid unnecessary friction, and still arrive at the far side with the same or greater effectiveness as someone who fought through the thickest point. And here's the key. Once you've crossed, nobody cares which part of the wall you tunneled through. The result is the same. The only difference is that you got there faster and with less wasted effort. Next, we will zoom out from this tactical level to a reality-bending perspective. The idea that your life already contains every version of yourself you could become, and tunneling is simply the art of switching between them. In quantum theory, the concept of the multiverse suggests that every possible outcome of every quantum event exists in some branch of reality. While physicists debate the literal truth of this, the metaphor it offers for your own life is too valuable to ignore. From this perspective, every version of you, the one who stayed stuck, the one who leapt years ago, the one who took a different path entirely, already exists in possibility space. You're not creating these versions. You're choosing which one becomes the reality you experience. This is a radical shift from the way most people think. In the conventional view, the future is an empty page, and you must build it step by step. In the multiverse view, the future is a library, and your choices determine which book you pull off the shelf. Tunneling, in this metaphor, is the act of putting down one book and picking up another without reading every page in between. Here's why this matters. If all versions already exist, then you're not trying to become the version of yourself that has crossed the barrier. You're aligning with them. You're syncing your state, your frequency, your probability field to match theirs, and when the match is complete, your experience shifts to that version's reality. This eliminates the false urgency of thinking you must build the entire path brick by brick. Instead, your work becomes tuning yourself to the reality where the leap has already occurred. That version of you already knows what's on the other side. They already operate from that state. Your task is to collapse your current identity into theirs. In practical terms, this means asking questions like, how does that version of me spend their days? What do they believe about what's possible? How do they respond to challenges differently than I do now? Who and what do they surround themselves with? Then you begin living those answers now. Every choice you make in alignment with that version strengthens the overlap between you and them until the shift is complete. When you see your life as a multiverse, failure loses its sting. A setback in one branch doesn't define you. It just means you're still synced with a branch that doesn't have the outcome you want. You can resync at any moment. It also means that extraordinary leaps stop feeling supernatural. They're simply switches between branches you've been overlapping with through your state long before the moment of collapse. Once you embrace this, you realize that tunneling isn't about building a bridge across the wall. It's about walking into a version of your life where the wall was never there in the first place. Next, we will explore how particles pick their reality, and how you can translate that selection process into a skill for navigating your own possible lives. In the quantum world, particles don't literally decide the way humans do, but their behavior, when viewed through the lens of probability and collapse, gives the impression of a selection process. Out of the cloud of possible states described by the wave function, one becomes actual when the system is measured. That moment is the pivot, the instant when potential becomes fact. From our point of view, it can look as though the particle has picked a specific outcome. In truth, the outcome is dictated by the conditions of the wave function before measurement. The choice is baked in long before the moment of collapse. And here is the human parallel. The outcomes you experience in life are not random rolls of the dice. They are the inevitable result of the state you've been sustaining before the decision point arrives. Most people approach life's big decisions as if they're making them in the moment. They scramble, weigh options, and hope they choose wisely. What they don't realize is that the choice was largely made by the state they maintained in the days, weeks, or years leading up to it. This is why two people can face the same opportunity and respond in completely different ways. One seizes it instinctively, the other hesitates and lets it pass. The difference isn't in the moment itself. It's in the conditioning of their probability fields before the moment arrived. If you want to hack this process, your work isn't in the moment of choice, it's in the preparation of state. You set your wave function so that the most favorable outcome is the natural collapse when the decision comes. That means knowing in advance what your preferred outcome is, structuring your environment and inputs to reinforce that outcome as normal, practicing micro-decisions that align with it so the big decision feels like a continuation rather than a leap into the unknown. This is also how you eliminate the paralyzing hesitation that kills so many opportunities. If you've been living in the state of the post-barrier self, the choice to step into that reality is automatic. You've been choosing it every day in smaller ways. In quantum terms, you've made the collapse inevitable long before the measurement moment. In life, you've been rehearsing the choice so thoroughly that when it appears, you're already in motion. When you understand this, decision-making stops feeling like gambling and starts feeling like execution of a plan you've already locked in. Next, we will move from hacking the selection process to practicing the skill of moving between versions of your life on purpose, the conscious art of timeline hopping. In physics, when a particle's probability field overlaps with multiple possible locations or states, the act of measurement places it in one of them. From the multiverse perspective, this is like the particle appearing in one branch of reality instead of another. In human life, timeline hopping is the deliberate act of shifting from one version of your life to another without following the slow, sequential route. You were never taught this skill, not because it's impossible, but because our culture is built on the assumption that the only way to move from point A to point B is through the points in between. Timeline hopping rejects that. It says, if point Z already exists in possibility space, and your state matches it, you can land there without traveling through the entire alphabet. This is not about reckless, random change. It's about precision. You're not throwing yourself at an undefined future. You're syncing with a version of reality that already holds the conditions you want. To practice timeline hopping, you define the destination state with clarity, the you in that reality, the environment, the conditions. Saturate your daily life with elements of that state, thought patterns, actions, environments, relationships. Reduce contradictions, habits, beliefs, and environments that anchor you to the current timeline must be dismantled. Sustain the match until the collapse moment arrives. The difficulty is not in making the jump. It's in maintaining the alignment long enough for the universe to register you as belonging to the target timeline. Most people flicker between states. One day in alignment, the next day back in their old patterns. This keeps them tethered to the old branch. The discipline is in holding the match. That's what causes the hop. When the hop happens, it may feel sudden, but there's a continuity to it. In your mind, you've been living there for a while. The environment simply catches up to your identity. And here's something liberating. Once you've done it once, you'll see how repeatable it is. You'll stop thinking of your life as one fixed storyline and start treating it as a set of navigable branches. This is the skill you were never taught because it doesn't fit the slow, incremental model that keeps systems orderly. But once you master it, you'll never again feel trapped in a single version of your life. Next, we will explore how to recognize the signs that you're already mid-jump and how to stabilize yourself so you don't snap back before the transition completes. The moment of tunneling is often invisible from the outside, but it's not invisible from the inside if you know what to look for. Most people pass through the early stages of a jump without realizing it, and because they don't recognize the signs, they sometimes sabotage the process before it completes. Mid-jump is the phase where your probability field has extended deeply into the new reality, but collapse hasn't yet occurred. You're still technically on the near side of the barrier, yet elements of the far side are starting to show up in your experience. This can be disorienting. You might notice conversations with people you previously thought were unreachable. Opportunities that align perfectly with your goal, but feel too soon. Small shifts in environment, schedule, or mindset that match the destination state more than your current one. These are the first fragments of the new reality bleeding through. The problem is, mid-jump can also feel unstable. Your old life hasn't completely released you, and your new one hasn't fully claimed you. This in-between can trigger doubt. You may start questioning whether the shift is real or whether you imagine the signs. If you're not careful, you'll start reinforcing the old state, telling yourself, it's not happening yet, which collapses your wave function back into the old reality. The key to surviving mid-jump is awareness without judgment. You observe the clues as confirmation, not as half measures. You treat the overlap between realities as proof that the transition is underway. This is also where sustaining your frequency match matters most. You can't afford to slide back into your old patterns here. The probability is too sensitive. Any significant drop in alignment can pull you back. Think of mid-jump as the moment when your feet leave one platform and you're in the air, headed for the next. There's no going back without falling. The safest thing to do is keep moving forward until your weight is fully supported by the new ground. And here's the paradox. The more normal you can make the signs of the new reality feel, the faster the transition completes. If you treat them as rare, shocking events, you reinforce the idea that you don't belong there yet. If you treat them as standard, you make it easier for the collapse to finalize in your favor. Once you can recognize mid-jump, you can protect it. You know which actions reinforce the leap, which words to avoid, which mental patterns to keep feeding. You stop looking for proof that it's working, because you understand that looking for proof can destabilize the probability. And when you protect the mid-jump phase, you not only land successfully, you can also learn to accelerate the crossing. Next, we will explore why some people can make that acceleration almost instant, while others get stuck in midair for years. From the outside, it can look unfair. Some people seem to shift realities overnight. They're in one position on Monday, and by Friday they're on the other side of the barrier, settled into the new state as if they've been there for years. Others linger in mid-jump for months, even years, getting glimpses of the far side but never fully arriving. The difference is rarely about talent or intelligence. It's about the stability of the pre-jump state and the precision of the alignment before the leap began. In tunneling, a particle with a strong, stable wave function that saturates the far side of the barrier will appear there quickly once measurement occurs. A particle with a weak, scattered wave function may flicker between sides, never committing fully. The human equivalent is preparation. Those who jump instantly have been living in the post-barrier frequency long before the leap. Their state is so consistent that when the collapse moment arrives, there's no hesitation, no internal contradiction to slow the process. Those who crawl, on the other hand, often start their leap while still heavily anchored to the old state. They haven't dismantled the habits, relationships, or beliefs that pull them back. As a result, the transition is a tug-of-war between the two realities, and it drags on. Speed, therefore, is a byproduct of coherence. If everything in your current state points toward the new reality, your thoughts, your environment, your actions, the shift happens cleanly. If even part of you is aligned with the old reality, the shift is messy. This is why you can't fake readiness. You might say you're ready for the leap, but if your daily life still matches the pre-jump identity, the probability field is split. That split slows everything down. The other factor in speed is the collapse moment itself. Some environments provide rapid measurement moments, high-intensity situations, decision-heavy contexts, fast-moving networks. Others provide them rarely, so the leap takes longer simply because the opportunities to collapse into the new state are scarce. Fast jumpers put themselves in environments that force frequent measurements, situations where decisions and opportunities are constant, so their state has multiple chances to collapse into the desired outcome. This is why acceleration is always possible. You increase speed by removing contradictions in your current state, saturating your environment with post-barrier conditions, placing yourself in high-frequency measurement contexts. When you combine coherence with opportunity density, the jump can feel instant. From your perspective, it's just the natural conclusion of months of alignment. From the outside, it looks like magic. Once you understand this, you stop envying those who leap quickly, and you start engineering your own speed. Next, we will enter a new layer of this journey. The inner physics of change, beginning with the barriers that exist inside your mind, which are often more formidable than any external obstacle. External walls are obvious. You can point to them: lack of resources, lack of access, environmental limitations, systemic resistance. But the most impenetrable barriers you'll ever face aren't out there. They're inside your own mind. In physics, a barrier is defined by the energy needed to cross it. In your mind, barriers are defined by the beliefs you've accepted as unchangeable truth. These mental barriers don't just slow you down. They rewrite your probability field so that the leap itself becomes impossible while you hold them. These inner walls are subtle because they disguise themselves as realism. They sound like, "That's just the way things are. People like me don't get opportunities like that. I need more time, money, or support before I can try." Each of these is a shape you've assigned to your wave function, and the longer you live inside that shape, the more your life conforms to it. Mental barriers are often inherited from family, from culture, from past experiences. You didn't build them, but you maintain them every time you reinforce their assumptions. And because they're invisible, they rarely get challenged. The irony is, these barriers tend to be more rigid than physical ones. A physical barrier might collapse due to external change, a new law, a sudden opportunity, a shift in the market. But a mental barrier will survive all of that unless you dismantle it consciously. To break them, you first need to catch them in action. Watch for the automatic thoughts that appear whenever you consider a leap. Notice how quickly your mind produces reasons it won't work. These thoughts aren't analysis. They're defense mechanisms designed to keep you safe by keeping you the same. Once you've spotted a mental barrier, you strip it of certainty. You don't have to replace it immediately with a new belief. You just stop treating it as an unquestionable fact. You treat it like a variable in an equation that you haven't solved yet. This destabilization is enough to let probability seep into places it couldn't before. It's like creating a thin spot in an otherwise solid wall. Once that thin spot exists, you can direct energy toward it and start tunneling through. The point is this: external barriers may slow you, but internal ones stop you before you even start. Until you dismantle them, all other tunneling strategies are weakened. Next, we will turn the tunneling process inward, showing you how to use the same principles that let particles bypass physical barriers to bypass your own outdated beliefs and identity limits. If you've dismantled a mental barrier, you've weakened it, but it can still exist as a lingering presence in your thought patterns. This is where mental tunneling comes in. Just as a particle can bypass a barrier without climbing over it, you can bypass an old belief without having to wrestle it into submission. Most self-development advice tells you to replace a limiting belief with an empowering one through repetition. That's the equivalent of trying to break through the wall brick by brick. It can work, but it's slow, exhausting, and sometimes the wall rebuilds itself when you're not looking. Mental tunneling is different. You don't try to destroy the old belief. You simply stop interacting with it. You redirect your attention and energy to the state that already exists beyond it. Let's say the belief is, "I can't succeed without X qualification." Instead of arguing with that belief or collecting evidence against it, you step into the identity of someone who already operates successfully without that qualification. You match the frequency of that reality until it becomes your default operating state. The belief is still there, in theory, but it's irrelevant because your probability field no longer includes it as a defining condition. You've bypassed it entirely. This works because beliefs are sustained by attention. The less you engage with them, the weaker their influence on your state. Over time, a bypassed belief loses coherence until it's no longer part of your internal landscape. The critical part is holding your focus on the post-barrier state long enough for the old belief to fade from relevance. If you flicker back and forth, One day in the new state, the next day back in the old mindset, the tunneling collapses and you're pulled back. Sustained alignment is what finalizes the bypass. The belief never has to be defeated. It simply ceases to exist in the version of reality you now occupy. Once you've mastered mental tunneling, the speed of change increases dramatically. You stop spending years arguing with your past conditioning and start living as if you've already been free of it for years. And that's when something remarkable happens. Your identity starts collapsing into a completely new form. One that no longer remembers what it felt like to be stuck behind that old wall. Next, we will move directly into that phenomenon, the collapse of old identities, and why it's both exhilarating and destabilizing when it happens. When a particle tunnels, it doesn't just move to a new location, its entire probability distribution changes. The moment it appears on the far side, the old wave function no longer applies. The equations that described it seconds ago are obsolete. Human identity works the same way. When you've sustained the frequency of your post-barrier self long enough and the leap completes, the old identity collapses. This isn't just a change, it's a discontinuity. Who you were before no longer exists in the same form. This collapse can be exhilarating. Suddenly, you're operating with different assumptions, different reflexes, different expectations. You respond to situations in ways that would have felt unnatural, even impossible, a short time ago. But it can also be destabilizing. The collapse means there is no familiar fallback. The mental and emotional furniture you've lived with for years, sometimes decades, is gone. The reference points that defined you in your own mind have been erased. This can trigger what feels like a personal identity crisis. You might look at choices you made in your old state and feel baffled. You may even struggle to relate to people or environments that were central to your previous life. And here's the strange part. This instability is not a flaw. It's proof the leap is real. In physics, collapse is irreversible. Once the wave function has resolved into a new state, you can't go back and recover the old one exactly as it was. In life, the same holds true. You can slide back into old patterns, but they'll never fit the same way because your reference state has shifted. The challenge in this phase is resisting the urge to rebuild the old identity just to feel stable. The discomfort can trick you into craving familiarity, even if that familiarity was the very thing you wanted to escape. Instead, you stabilize by rapidly integrating the traits, skills, and perceptions of the new identity. You let them define normal as quickly as possible. This is where deliberate habits, environmental design, and aligned relationships become critical. They reinforce the reality you've just entered before doubt can pull you back. And here's what's powerful. The more you experience identity collapse, the less frightening it becomes. You start to crave the sensation of shedding an outdated self. You realize that every leap is not just about arriving somewhere new, but about becoming someone who couldn't have existed without the leap. Next, we will address the most dangerous part of this transformation, the snapback effect, and how to prevent yourself from getting pulled back into your old reality before the new one fully solidifies. The snapback effect is the single greatest threat to a newly completed leap. It's the gravitational pull of your old reality, and it can undo weeks, months, even years of work if you don't handle it carefully. In physics, a system can return to a previous state if external conditions force it back. In human terms, the snapback effect happens when the structures of your old identity, habits, relationships, environments, and narratives are still strong enough to pull you toward your pre-leap state. It's not always malicious. Sometimes, it's simply that your surroundings expect you to act as you used to. Friends, family, and colleagues may unconsciously pressure you to play your old role. Environments may still carry the triggers and routines of your former life. The result? Without vigilance, you start collapsing back into the old probability field. This is why the first period after a leap is the most critical. You must guard your state like it's the rarest resource you own, because it is. Preventing snapback begins with 3 principles. Immediate environmental shift. If possible, change the spaces you spend time in. Even small adjustments, rearranging your workspace, altering your daily route, replacing objects that anchor old habits, can weaken the environmental cues tied to your old state. Boundary enforcement, you must be willing to limit or reshape interactions with people who pull you back. This doesn't always mean cutting them off entirely. but it does mean controlling the contexts in which you engage with them. Rapid integration rituals, every day, reinforce the identity of your post-sleep self. This could be through specific actions, language choices, or commitments that are natural in your new reality but foreign to the old one. Snapback is also psychological. Your mind may test your new state by presenting thoughts like, maybe I overreacted, maybe I should slow down and ease back into things, maybe I was fine where I was. These are not reasoned reflections. They're the old identity trying to survive. Recognizing them as survival signals, not wisdom, is critical. One of the most effective snapback preventions is momentum. The faster you act in your new reality, making decisions, taking steps, solidifying commitments, the harder it becomes for the old state to reattach itself. You don't give the old identity time to reassert dominance. You crowd it out with the new one until it becomes unthinkable to return. Avoiding snapback is not about paranoia. It's about stewardship. You've just tunneled through to a new state, one most people never reach. Protecting it is the difference between permanent transformation and a short-lived high. Next, we will move into harnessing momentum itself, not just to avoid regression, but to keep accelerating beyond the leap, using your breakthrough as fuel for even greater velocity. Momentum is not speed. Speed is a measure of how fast you're moving. Momentum is a measure of how hard it is to stop you once you're moving. In the quantum world, a tunneled particle doesn't just appear on the far side of a barrier and freeze in place. It continues in motion, following the trajectory dictated by its energy state. The leap itself may have been instantaneous, but what happens after is just as important, because a particle without momentum is a particle at risk of being trapped again. In human transformation, the same law applies. A leap into a new reality isn't self-sustaining unless you build momentum inside that reality. Without it, you stall. And a stalled state is vulnerable to erosion, the slow creep of old habits, old beliefs, and old patterns that eventually pull you back to where you started. Think of your leap as the ignition point of a rocket. Breaking free of the barrier is only the first stage. Once you're past it, you need sustained thrust to keep moving. Otherwise, you drift aimlessly until gravity reclaims you. So how do you create quantum momentum in your life? It begins with stacked action, a sequence of moves that compounds rather than dissipates energy. This means each action in your new reality should feed into the next, building pressure and acceleration instead of scattering your focus. For example, accepting an opportunity that forces you to operate as your new self. Using that opportunity to meet people whose expectations of you align with your new identity. Leveraging those relationships to create situations that reinforce and expand your new state. This creates a loop where every action deepens your position in the new timeline. The second element of quantum momentum is energy cycling. Momentum drains if you treat your leap as the endpoint instead of a checkpoint. You have to feed the system. This means regularly re-engaging with challenges that demand your new skills, setting targets that stretch you slightly beyond comfort without overwhelming you, rewarding yourself in ways that reinforce your identity rather than distract from it. In physics, energy lost to friction slows momentum. In life, friction takes the form of distractions, regressions, and complacency. You remove friction by being deliberate about what you say yes to and ruthless about what you eliminate. The third element is narrative reinforcement. Humans live inside stories. The way you explain your leap to yourself and others determines how stable it feels. If your story is that the leap was a lucky accident, momentum dies. If your story is that the leap was inevitable and the natural result of who you've become, momentum grows. Momentum also thrives on directional clarity. Without a clear trajectory, acceleration is random, and random acceleration burns energy without getting you anywhere. You need to know not just that you want to keep moving, but where you're moving toward. That destination can evolve over time, but you must always be moving toward something specific. This keeps the probability field stretched toward the next leap instead of collapsing into stasis. Here's the paradox. The stronger your momentum, the easier it becomes to create new leaps. Just as in quantum mechanics, a particle in motion interacts differently with barriers than one at rest. You in motion encounter obstacles differently than you did before. You no longer see them as immovable walls, you see them as temporary terrain features, and you pass through them with less effort. Momentum is the bridge between one leap and the next. It's what turns tunneling from a rare event into a way of life. Without it, leaps are isolated miracles. With it, leaps become inevitable sequences in an ongoing expansion. And once you've learned to sustain motion beyond the barrier, the next question is, how do you start this process on purpose in small ways to train your system to leap repeatedly? Next, we will move into designing your first microjump, a deliberately engineered, low-resistance leap that sets the stage for bigger, faster, more frequent breakthroughs. A microjump is a controlled, deliberate leap across a small barrier that mimics the physics and psychology of a major breakthrough, without the high stakes. It's a training tool, a proof of concept, and a momentum generator all at once. In quantum terms, a microjump is like a tunneling event across a barrier so thin that success is almost guaranteed. Yet the mechanics are identical to those needed for a larger leap. By practicing here, you build the alignment skills and probability management required for the big jumps. The advantage of starting small is twofold. It gives you visible evidence that tunneling is real and repeatable. It builds the muscle memory of sustaining alignment until collapse occurs. Step 1. Pick a barrier. This should be something that feels slightly out of reach right now, requires you to shift your state but not overhaul your life, can be measured clearly. You'll know for certain when the leap has occurred. Examples: initiating a conversation with someone outside your current network, securing a small opportunity in your desired field, or achieving a measurable performance goal you've never hit before. Step 2. Define the post-barrier state. You need to know exactly what success looks and feels like. In microjumps, this is even more important than in big leaps because the gap between your current state and the post-barrier state is narrow, which means alignment can be exact. Ask, how does the me on the other side behave? What do they believe about themselves in this specific context? What evidence exists in their life that this barrier is behind them? Step 3. Align relentlessly. Here's where you practice the core tunneling principle. Stop interacting with the barrier as though it's solid. Live as if the post-barrier state is already normal. This means adopting the habits, speech patterns, and micro-decisions that match it, not in bursts but continuously. Step 4. Remove contradictions. Microjumps are sensitive to inconsistency. If you're aligning in one moment and reinforcing the old state in the next, the probability field remains split and collapse stalls. Even tiny contradictions matter here. A single "I can't" thought repeated too often can keep the barrier intact. Step 5. Create a measurement moment. A leap needs a collapse point, an event that forces reality to select a state. In your microjump, design this moment in advance. Schedule the meeting, send the application, enter the competition, make the ask. Without this, your wave function can hover indefinitely without collapsing. Step 6. Secure the landing. Once the microjump completes, don't treat it as trivial. Reinforce it as proof. Update your identity, log the experience, and note exactly what worked. This transforms the event from an isolated win into a replicable model. Why is this so important? Because the microjump is your personal laboratory. It allows you to experiment with tunneling variables, alignment duration, environmental changes, narrative reinforcement in a low-risk context. And the more you repeat it, the more your system normalizes the leap process itself. When microjumps become second nature, your nervous system stops treating major leaps as dangerous. It starts treating them as scaled-up versions of something you've done dozens of times before. That's when big breakthroughs stop being rare events and start becoming your standard operating mode. Next, we will explore how to ritualize these shifts, creating a daily practice that reshapes your probability field consistently so that leaps, big or small, stop being anomalies and start becoming your baseline reality. Leaps don't begin the moment you decide to make them. They begin in the daily micro-adjustments that change the shape of your probability field. In quantum physics, the probability field is everything. It dictates where a particle is most likely to be found when measurement happens. If you want to consistently tunnel into new realities, you have to treat your probability field like a living ecosystem. And the most effective way to shape it is through a consistent daily ritual. A probability shift ritual is not about superstition. It's about consciously and repeatedly aligning your state with the version of reality you want to experience, until that alignment becomes your default. Most people sabotage their own leaps by waking up every day and re-entering the same mental, emotional, and physical environment that supports their current reality. They want a new outcome, but they keep feeding the old wave function. The ritual breaks that loop. It's a daily recalibration, a way to actively feed the probabilities you want and starve the ones you don't. Over time, this shifts the entire landscape of your life so that the desired leap is no longer a low probability anomaly, but the most natural outcome. Here's how to build yours. Step 1. Open with state priming. The first moments of your day are when your probability field is most malleable. Instead of letting default thoughts take over, consciously set the tone. This could be through affirmations that are identity-based. I am operating as the version of me who already lives this outcome. Visualization that's sensory-rich, or movement that matches the energy state of your target self. Step 2. Evidence injection. Introduce at least one piece of sensory or informational evidence that your desired reality already exists. This could be exposure to people who live it, environments that reflect it, or reminders of past shifts you've achieved. The goal is to normalize the reality, making it feel less like a fantasy and more like an inevitability. Step 3. Probability elimination. Consciously remove or counteract one piece of evidence for your old reality. This could be unsubscribing from a feed that reinforces limitation, discarding objects that anchor old habits, or avoiding conversations that reinforce the identity you've outgrown. Step 4. Micro-alignment action. Take one tangible action that your post-leap self would naturally take. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sending an email, making a decision, arranging your workspace, as long as it's consistent with the future you're aligning with. Step 5. Night closure. End your day by reinforcing the probability you've been feeding. Reflect on the ways you acted in alignment, visualize the continuation of this reality into tomorrow, and consciously release any moments you slipped back into the old state without judgment. Why daily? Because probability fields decay without input. Just as a physical system reverts to its most stable configuration without sustained energy, your reality will revert to its familiar form if you don't keep feeding the new configuration. Over weeks and months, the ritual stops feeling like a practice and starts feeling like simply being you. And that's when the real magic happens. You stop thinking of alignment as something you have to do, and start living in a state where misalignment feels unnatural. Next, we will go from daily rituals to something more aggressive. Stacking tunnels, or chaining leaps together so that each one amplifies the next and accelerates your movement through realities at a speed most people can't comprehend. In physics, when multiple tunneling events occur in sequence, their effects compound. A particle that tunnels through one barrier may immediately encounter another, and if its energy state is high enough, the second leap is even more probable than the first. In life, you can engineer the same phenomenon. This is stacking tunnels, chaining breakthroughs so that each one boosts your capacity for the next, creating exponential acceleration instead of isolated victories. Most people approach transformation in a linear way. Set a goal, achieve it, recover, set another goal. This approach resets momentum after every leap. Stacking tunnels skips the recovery plateau and uses the momentum from one leap to slingshot into the next. The key is to treat each leap not as an endpoint but as a launch pad. The moment you land in your new reality, you're already scanning for the next barrier. Not because you're dissatisfied, but because you understand that movement is the natural state of a quantum jumper. Here's how stacking works in practice. Step 1. Identify sequential barriers. Instead of one massive leap, define a series of smaller barriers that, when crossed, bring you to your ultimate state. This increases frequency of wins and reduces the resistance each leap faces. Step 2. Carry momentum forward immediately. The day you complete a leap, take at least one action toward the next. Even if it's symbolic, it signals to your system that you're in continuous motion. Step 3. Compound frequency matching. Each new leap benefits from the alignment of the previous one. Maintain the energy state from your last success and use it as the baseline for the next, This reduces the time needed for alignment because your system already operates at a higher frequency. Step 4. Eliminate the reset reflex. Your mind will want to rest in the new reality. Rest physically if needed, but don't let your mental and emotional state cool down. Cooling down resets the wave function and forces you to rebuild alignment from scratch. Step 5. Monitor for barrier inflation. The longer you wait between leaps, the more formidable the next barrier can appear. Stacking minimizes this by keeping perception fluid. Barriers remain thin and passable because you haven't allowed the old identity to resolidify. The beauty of stacking is in its compounding effect. The more leaps you chain together, the more your probability field evolves to favor high-velocity shifts. Eventually, the leap process itself becomes reflexive. You see a barrier, and without hesitation, you prepare the alignment for tunneling. Stacking tunnels is the difference between transformation as an occasional event and transformation as a lifestyle. It's how you compress years of change into months, or even weeks. Next, we will take the skill and apply it to a defensive capability, spotting new barriers before they solidify, so you can tunnel through them before they even appear solid to anyone else. The easiest barrier to tunnel through is the one that hasn't fully formed. Most people never get this advantage because they don't notice a barrier until it's already dense, reinforced, and culturally recognized as real. By that point, tunneling is still possible, but it requires more energy, more alignment time, and more probability shaping. In quantum systems, barriers can exist in varying states of formation. At times, they are so thin that particles move through them with virtually no measurable resistance. Over time, environmental conditions can thicken the barrier, making tunneling less probable. Your life works the same way. Situations, challenges, and limitations begin as subtle patterns, tiny resistances that, if ignored, grow into full-fledged obstacles. If you can spot them early, you can tunnel through them almost effortlessly, while everyone else is still adjusting to their existence. The anatomy of an emerging barrier. Emerging barriers often show up as small but repeated delays, rules or expectations that are temporary but begin to normalize, early doubts that, if left unchallenged, could become fixed beliefs, minor changes in environment that alter your movement toward a goal. At this stage, most people either dismiss them as irrelevant or adjust to them without question. Both responses feed the barrier's growth. The key is to treat these early patterns like warning signals. If you feel even a subtle resistance forming between you and a desired outcome, investigate it. Ask, what's causing this? Who benefits if this resistance becomes permanent? How am I unconsciously reinforcing it? Preemptive tunneling. Once you've identified an emerging barrier, you act before it matures. This can mean making a decision ahead of a policy change, claiming a position before competition intensifies, reinforcing a belief before doubt sets in. This is not about recklessness, it's about precision timing. You're moving in the window where the barrier structure is incomplete, so the tunneling probability is near its maximum. Why most people miss this window? Most people have been trained to wait for clarity before acting. Unfortunately, by the time a barrier is clear enough for the majority to acknowledge, it's already strong. Early detection requires comfort with ambiguity, seeing the shadow before the object, and trusting you're read enough to act on it. It also requires self-trust. If you spot an emerging barrier but hesitate because no one else seems to see it, you've missed your moment. The most seamless leaps happen before the crowd arrives at the wall. When you build this skill, you start moving through life differently. You're not reacting to obstacles. You're anticipating them, bypassing them before they're even recognized. This creates a reality where barriers appear to dissolve before they can inconvenience you. And that takes us directly into the next capability, the science of disappearing problems, where the barrier doesn't just get bypassed. It ceases to exist in your experience altogether. Some barriers don't need to be crossed at all. They can be made irrelevant, removed from your probability field so completely that they no longer show up as part of your reality. This is the science of disappearing problems. In physics, if a particle's energy state is incompatible with a barrier, that barrier effectively doesn't exist for the particle. The equations that describe its motion don't even include the barrier as a factor. The same is possible for you. If your state no longer matches the conditions in which the problem exists, you will simply never encounter it. Why this works? Barriers, whether physical, social, or psychological, are not universal. They are context-dependent. They only apply to realities where certain rules hold. Change your reality and the rule, and therefore the barrier no longer applies. An example in principle: a locked door is a barrier in the reality where you must pass through it to get where you're going. But if your destination changes so that the door is no longer on your path, the barrier disappears. Removing problems at the source. Disappearing a problem requires identifying the conditions that make it relevant. Ask, what assumptions make this a problem? What choices keep me inside the version of reality where this barrier exists? What alternative realities exist where this barrier is meaningless? Once you've identified the conditions, you systematically stop feeding them. You remove your energy from the version of reality where the problem is present and invest it into a reality where the problem is absent by design. The role of identity in problem dissolution. Many problems only exist for certain identities. When you outgrow the identity that has the problem, you outgrow the problem itself. This is why identity shifts are so powerful. They don't just change how you respond to problems, they change which problems even have access to you. This is also why some people seem to live above certain difficulties. It's not that they're luckier, it's that they've stopped existing in the probability fields where those difficulties are common. Practical application. To make a problem disappear, you can shift your goal so the barrier is no longer on the path. Change the scope of your engagement so the problem is irrelevant. Upgrade your role so the barrier is someone else's concern entirely. The paradox is that disappearing problems often feels like cheating, because you're conditioned to think you must face and conquer every barrier you encounter. But in reality, some barriers are best ignored out of existence. When you master disappearing problems, your rate of forward movement accelerates dramatically. Not because you've become better at crossing barriers, but because you've designed a life where far fewer barriers ever appear. And that leads us into a new phase, advanced tunneling mastery, where you apply these principles not just to yourself, but to groups, networks, and entire systems, multiplying the impact of your leaps. A single particle can tunnel through a barrier. But in certain systems, when particles are entangled or operating in resonance, tunneling behavior can spread across the entire network. One particle's leap increases the probability that others in the system will leap too. The same principle applies to people. Most human systems, families, organizations, creative teams, operate at a shared energy state. This shared state defines what's considered possible, what's resisted, and how quickly change is allowed to happen. If you can shift the state of that collective, the barriers that seem fixed to the group start to dissolve for everyone. This is group tunneling. Why group tunneling works. When one member of a group leaps, the others are forced to reevaluate the barrier. The leap itself becomes proof that the barrier isn't absolute. This proof destabilizes the group's collective probability field, opening space for others to pass through the same barrier without having to generate all the energy themselves. In practical terms, a high-energy leap by one person can reduce the alignment time and effort required for others in the group to follow. It's not just inspiration, it's a measurable lowering of resistance in the collective field. Engineering a group leap. To intentionally cause group tunneling, 3 conditions are necessary. Shared recognition of the barrier. Everyone must acknowledge the existence of the barrier. If half the group denies it's there, the probability field remains fractured. A catalyst leap. At least one member, ideally one with influence or visibility, must make the leap in full view of the group. This is the destabilizing event. Rapid reinforcement. Immediately after the catalyst leap, others must take actions toward their own leap before the collective field restabilizes into its old form. The hidden challenge. Group tunneling can backfire if the leap of one member triggers defensive consolidation in others. Some will double down on the barrier's validity to preserve their identity or sense of safety. This is why the leap must be framed not as a personal anomaly, but as a natural and available pathway for everyone. Language is key here. If the catalyst speaks in a way that emphasizes uniqueness, only I could have done this, it closes the door for others. If they emphasize transferability, this is available to all of us. The barrier thins across the group. When group tunneling becomes self-sustaining, once enough members have leapt, the group's baseline state shifts. Barriers that were once considered immovable are now outside the group's probability field entirely. New norms emerge, where leaps are expected, and stagnation is treated as unusual. At this point, group tunneling becomes a structural feature of the system. The culture itself is designed for collective breakthroughs. Once you've experienced the power of shifting an entire group state, you'll notice something even more intriguing. Your personal leaps can affect people who aren't even in your immediate environment. That takes us into the resonance effect, the way your state alters probability fields you don't consciously interact with. In quantum mechanics, resonance occurs when a system vibrates at a frequency that amplifies the energy of another system. It's not about direct contact. It's about harmony between states that allows energy transfer without physical interaction. Human beings operate under the same principle. Every person you encounter, and many you don't, has a probability field shaped partly by the energetic information you carry. When your state is stable, coherent, and high frequency, it can shift the probabilities in others without deliberate teaching or persuasion. This is resonance. How resonance works in human systems. Your actions, words, and even silent presence carry the signature of your current state. Others unconsciously measure themselves against this signal. If the signal represents a state they desire but haven't accessed, their own probability field begins to destabilize in that direction. This doesn't mean you can force a leap in someone else, but you can create conditions where their leap becomes far more likely. The mechanics of energetic influence. Coherence, your signal must be consistent. If you're projecting high-frequency alignment in one moment and slipping into low-frequency contradiction the next, the resonance collapses. Amplitude, the strength of your signal matters. A weak, tentative leap has less impact than one made with full commitment and visible integration. Duration, the longer you sustain your state, the greater the chance that others' fields will synchronize to it. Examples of resonance in action. In a creative setting, one person producing work at a breakthrough level can cause others to raise their standards without anyone formally asking them to. In a company, one department shifting to a radically more efficient model can lead to other departments adopting similar practices without direct coordination. These shifts often look spontaneous, but they are the result of sustained resonance. The shadow side of resonance. Resonance is neutral. Just as a coherent high-frequency state can elevate others, a coherent low-frequency state can lower them. This is why protecting your state is not only a personal responsibility, but an ethical one if you operate in environments where others' trajectories can be influenced by yours. If you maintain a frequency of resignation, fear, or limitation, you can unconsciously stabilize those states in others, making their leaps harder. Leveraging resonance deliberately. To use resonance as a force multiplier. Maintain your state visibly, even in the presence of disbelief. Share your processes openly so others can see the pathway. Reinforce early signs of alignment in others to strengthen their own signal. Over time, you'll notice that your very presence becomes a form of probability shaping. People leave interactions with you more aligned with their own leaps than they were before. And when you combine this with deliberate coordination, you can synchronize multiple realities at once. A skill that allows you to operate in different probability fields simultaneously, managing and benefiting from each without collapse. That's where we go next. In quantum theory, a particle can exist in a superposition, holding multiple potential states until observed. When certain conditions are met, those states can interact in ways that produce outcomes not possible in isolation. You can create a similar phenomenon in your life. Synchronizing multiple realities means maintaining coherent alignment with more than one desirable outcome at the same time, without collapsing prematurely into just one. It's a rare skill. Most people are trained to pick a single target and abandon all others until it's reached. But the universe operates in parallel, not in single file. Why this matters? In linear thinking, progress looks like moving from point A to point B in a straight line. But in a probabilistic framework, Point B isn't the only viable outcome. There are countless BS, each with unique benefits and trade-offs. Synchronization lets you nourish several of these at once, increasing the total probability that one or more will manifest rapidly. This isn't indecision. It's strategic expansion of your active wave function. Clarity on each reality. You must define each outcome in sensory and emotional detail so your alignment with it is distinct. Blurred visions collapse into noise. State separation. Each reality carries a unique frequency. You need to recognize the differences so you can shift into each intentionally without dilution. Energy cycling. You allocate time and attention to each reality in a balanced way, preventing any from decaying below probability threshold. The danger in managing multiple realities is unintentional collapse into one before you're ready. This often happens when external feedback pushes you to choose prematurely. To avoid this, you must protect your internal space from demands for a single-track explanation. Remind yourself daily that these realities are parallel, not competing. Delay final measurement, i.e., commitment, until your readiness is strategic, not reactive. Opportunities for one reality begin to appear without you losing progress in another. Skills, relationships, or resources gained in one reality also benefit the others. You feel expansion, not tension, while holding multiple outcomes in focus. Why this multiplies your leaps. When you're nurturing several high-probability realities, the manifestation of any one of them pulls the others closer. It's as if the universe recognizes your capacity for multi-alignment and accelerates delivery across the board. The deeper skill here is in keeping the barriers thin across all chosen realities, which requires mastery of state control, boundary management, and attention discipline. Once you can do this, the old game of overcoming barriers begins to fade, because you're no longer living in a framework where barriers dominate your experience. You're stepping into the barrier-free paradigm. There's a point where tunneling stops being a special event and becomes the baseline. At this point, you're no longer scanning for barriers to overcome, because you exist in a mode where they rarely, if ever, appear in your experience. This is living outside the barrier paradigm. The barrier paradigm is the mental and cultural operating system that assumes progress must be earned through resistance. It's the belief that obstacles are inevitable, that each advance must be preceded by struggle, and that value is proven by the difficulty of the path. This paradigm is reinforced everywhere, in education, in career structures, in cultural stories about heroes and success. Remaining in the barrier paradigm, even after you've learned tunneling, drains energy. It subtly encourages you to expect difficulty, which shapes your probability field to produce difficulty. You start manifesting barriers simply to meet your own expectations about how growth works. Living outside the paradigm doesn't mean denial. It means you've restructured your reality so that the rules of the old framework no longer apply to you. In this state, you select environments where alignment is the default. You interact primarily with people who normalize breakthroughs. You treat problems as signals for rerouting rather than challenges to endure. The absence of barriers becomes so normal that when you do encounter resistance, it stands out sharply, making it easier to bypass. Audit your inputs, remove media, conversations, and influences that glorify struggle as the only path to success. Anchor in evidence. Keep records of how often breakthroughs happen without heavy resistance. This reinforces the new norm. Decline unnecessary battles. Not every fight is yours to take. The more you say no to irrelevant resistance, the more your field remains clean. Living outside the barrier paradigm changes how you see time, opportunity, and self-worth. Without the constant pressure to earn your progress through difficulty, you can make faster, cleaner decisions. Creativity flourishes because you're not spending half your energy anticipating resistance. Why most people don't get here. This state requires a willingness to let go of the identity of the struggler, which for many is a deeply ingrained part of self-image. The cultural validation of overcoming hardship can be addictive. But once you've tasted the ease and velocity of a barrier-free life, the trade-off becomes clear. And when you live here long enough, another transformation takes place. Your relationship with time itself begins to warp. You no longer experience it as a rigid sequence, but as a flexible dimension you can bend, which is exactly what we explore next. Time, for most people, feels like a conveyor belt. It moves at a fixed pace, delivering experiences one after another in an orderly, predictable line. In the conventional model of progress, you wait for things to happen, stack years on top of years, and hope that enough time plus enough effort equals meaningful change. But when tunneling becomes your method of movement, that relationship begins to unravel. You start to notice that time is not the rigid, universal force you were told it was. It bends to the structure of your probability field, stretching or collapsing depending on the state you hold. This is not metaphorical. It is the direct experiential effect of moving outside the linear grind and into quantum leaps. When you leap, the connection between cause and effect is compressed. What used to take years can unfold in days or weeks, not because the tasks were rushed but because the barrier that demanded linear progression no longer exists. In tunneling, the moments before the leap can feel elongated: preparation, alignment, the invisible gathering of probability, and then, once the jump occurs, the shift itself is instantaneous. This disconnection between effort and outcome alters your internal clock. You begin to experience time as a fluid resource rather than a relentless stream. At first, this can be disorienting. You may feel like you've skipped ahead in your own story, arriving at outcomes before you've put in what the old paradigm would call enough time. This can trigger guilt or suspicion. You might question whether you've somehow cheated, whether you've missed critical steps. But these doubts are only remnants of the linear mindset. The truth is, time was never the primary driver, alignment was. By controlling the alignment, you controlled the rate at which time delivered results. Once you integrate this, the way you make decisions shifts. You no longer think in terms of when will this happen, but rather how quickly can I align to the state where it already has? Deadlines, milestones, and waiting periods stop feeling like immovable markers and start feeling like flexible suggestions. You can bring outcomes closer by increasing the frequency and coherence of your alignment. You can also intentionally slow time, stretching moments of creation or enjoyment so they feel expansive. One of the most striking effects is on memory. In the linear paradigm, memory is the thread that stitches together a continuous story. But when you tunnel, the old chapters no longer fit neatly with the new. It's as though your personal history has been rewritten from the perspective of the new reality, making certain struggles or delays feel like they belong to someone else entirely. This creates the sensation of having lived multiple lives inside one, each with its own timeline. Tunneling also disrupts the shared timeline with others. While you might leap ahead into a reality where certain goals are already achieved, people around you may still be moving toward those goals at a conventional pace. This can create a sense of temporal dislocation. Conversations feel out of sync, plans no longer match, and your reference points for urgency shift dramatically. If not managed well, this gap can cause frustration or alienation. But if handled consciously, it becomes an opportunity to guide others toward their own shifts, compressing their timelines as well. The more you work with this altered sense of time, the more you realize that the future is not a destination you travel toward. It is a selection you make from infinite possibilities that already exist. You choose the version of reality you want to experience and align with it until it becomes your present. From this perspective, the future can arrive instantly if your alignment is precise enough. The idea of waiting loses its grip on you. This can be unsettling for those anchored in the linear paradigm. They might warn you about skipping steps or advise patience based on their own clock. But once you've seen that time is pliable, it's hard to return to treating it as a fixed law. You stop negotiating with delay and instead focus entirely on positioning yourself in the state that collapses the desired reality into now. Living in this relationship with time changes how you value it. You no longer measure it in hours or years, but in leaps and alignments. You might accomplish in 1 month what someone else expects to take a decade, not because you worked harder in a compressed window, but because you eliminated the timeline altogether. You no longer use time, you choose it. And when you choose it deliberately, you can stop it from being the barrier it once was. Next, we will explore what happens when, after mastering time, you stop seeing the universe as something to work against and instead start engaging it as a cooperative partner in your leaps, making it an active collaborator in your reality shifts. When most people talk about the universe, They treat it as a neutral backdrop or, worse, an indifferent force. In this view, you operate independently, pushing against circumstances, hoping for luck or bracing for resistance. Tunneling shifts that relationship entirely. Once you've experienced enough leaps, you notice that the universe is not simply tolerating your movement, it's participating in it. The first sign of this shift is the way synchronicities begin to cluster. You might set your alignment for a particular leap, and suddenly resources, connections, and opportunities appear in a sequence too precise to dismiss as coincidence. In the old mindset, these would be called strokes of luck. In the tunneling paradigm, they are signs of active cooperation. Your alignment sends a clear signal into the fabric of reality, and the universe rearranges its variables to match. Cooperation doesn't mean the universe does all the work for you. It means you are no longer working in opposition to its structure. When your state is coherent, your actions and the universe's natural tendencies move in the same direction. Obstacles either dissolve or transform into stepping stones without you needing to force them. This is why leaps often feel smoother than the grind. Not because you've eliminated all challenge, but because challenge and support are now aligned toward the same outcome. Seeing the universe as a partner changes how you initiate leaps. Instead of approaching them as battles to win, you frame them as co-created movements. You set the frequency, and the universe amplifies it through events you couldn't have orchestrated alone. The collaboration becomes evident in moments when the right person appears without your seeking them, or when an apparent setback opens a door that was previously invisible. Trust becomes central here. In the grind mindset, trust is often withheld until after results appear. But in cooperation, trust is the condition that makes the results possible. You act with the confidence that the universe is actively arranging conditions in your favor, even before there's visible proof. This trust prevents hesitation and keeps your alignment intact long enough for the leap to occur. Another aspect of cooperation is timing. In linear work, timing is often treated as a fixed schedule you try to match. In the tunneling cooperation model, timing is fluid. The universe may deliver sooner than expected if alignment is strong, or delay slightly if more optimal conditions are assembling. Instead of resisting these shifts, you treat them as evidence of fine-tuning. You stop forcing timelines and start refining your signal, knowing that when the leap happens, it will land you in a more precise and beneficial reality than your original plan imagined. Cooperation also alters your emotional stance. Gratitude stops being a post-result reaction and becomes a pre-result state. You maintain gratitude not as a moral virtue but as a frequency that keeps your alignment clean. The more you sustain it, the more the universe mirrors it back in the form of harmonious outcomes. Over time, you begin to notice that cooperation is not selective. The universe is not choosing favorites. It is simply responding to coherence. Anyone who aligns as you do will see similar patterns. This removes the mystery and replaces it with responsibility. If the cooperation fades, it's not because the universe abandoned you, but because your state slipped out of coherence. The partnership remains constant. The maintenance is yours. When you operate here long enough, your view of effort changes. Effort is no longer about overpowering obstacles. It's about sustaining the frequency that keeps the universe engaged as your collaborator. You choose actions that reinforce the partnership, avoiding those that disrupt it. Even high-intensity work feels lighter because it's not all on you. You're carrying half the load, and the universe is carrying the rest. Next, we move into a territory that tests this partnership deeply: the ethics of jumping timelines. Once you know the universe will cooperate, you face a new question. Should you leap simply because you can? Or are there choices that call for restraint? Once the ability to tunnel and jump timelines becomes natural, the question of capability stops being the main focus. You know you can do it. You've done it repeatedly. The question that begins to press in from the edges is different. Should you? In the early stages, leaping feels like pure liberation, a way to bypass limits, rewrite personal history, and claim realities that would otherwise be out of reach. But with mastery comes the recognition that each jump has ripple effects, and those effects do not end with you. A leap is not a private act. When you shift into a new timeline, you don't disappear from the network of connections and influences you're part of. You alter it. The people in your orbit may feel those changes without fully understanding their source. Their opportunities, decisions, and emotional states can be affected simply because your position in the shared probability field has shifted. Sometimes this is beneficial, creating openings for others. But it can also destabilize someone who relied on your presence in a certain way. The ethical dimension emerges when you consider that jumping is not just about self-gain. It's about the web of relationships and systems you touch. Moving yourself into a radically different reality might unintentionally remove a resource from someone else's or introduce pressures they're not prepared for. The skill, then, is not to freeze yourself in place to avoid impact, but to jump with awareness and intentionality. This awareness involves asking before a leap, who will be affected by this change? Will it pull anyone into a lower probability field, or will it create a vacuum that destabilizes them? In some cases, you can mitigate these effects by preparing others for the change, offering them ways to stabilize their own field, or ensuring they have access to new opportunities your leap might generate. In other cases, the leap itself becomes a form of invitation, showing others what's possible and encouraging them to match frequency rather than resist it. There is also the matter of consent. Most people never consciously agree to be pulled into someone else's accelerated reality. Yet resonance can do exactly that. It can elevate someone's field simply because of their proximity to you. While this might seem harmless, it can be disorienting if they haven't chosen that level of velocity for themselves. The ethical approach is to recognize this potential and offer transparency when your state is likely to influence others. Let them know the pace and nature of the shift they're stepping into. On the personal level, ethics also means questioning your own motivations. Are you leaping to escape a challenge that would serve your growth if faced directly? Are you skipping into realities that satisfy short-term desires while bypassing deeper development? Quantum tunneling is not an excuse to avoid every form of friction. Some forms are necessary to stabilize the state you're jumping toward. If you strip them away prematurely, the new reality might be unstable or unsustainable. Another layer involves the content of the reality you're entering. Every potential timeline contains its own set of ethical landscapes. Choosing a reality where your goals are achieved at the expense of others' well-being might bring temporary success, but it also anchors you in a field where harm is normalized. This shapes your future leaps, pulling you toward states that reinforce that harm. Ethics here is not about arbitrary rules. It's about the long-term integrity of your trajectory. Mastery brings power, and power magnifies responsibility. When you understand that timelines are not separate from one another, but woven together in a vast network of probabilities, every leap becomes an act of co-creation. The awareness that you are not only shifting yourself but potentially altering the shape of the collective experience is the compass for ethical movement. This doesn't mean paralysis. It means precision, leaping in ways that enhance your trajectory while leaving the field richer for others as well. Once you begin to operate from this place, the emotional tone of leaping changes. There is a steadiness to it, a sense of maturity. You're no longer proving that you can escape the grind. You're refining how you shape reality, conscious of the aftershocks. And this awareness naturally leads to the next challenge, the emotional cost of moving faster than the world around you. When your rate of change accelerates beyond the norm, you discover a truth most people never face. There is a cost to moving faster than your environment. Leaping ahead feels exhilarating in the moment, the rush of bypassing barriers, the clarity of stepping into a reality that once seemed far away. But as the novelty settles, you begin to notice the distance that opens between you and the world you came from. Relationships are often the first place this shows up. People you were once perfectly in sync with may now feel slow, resistant, or consumed by challenges you no longer face. Conversations that used to energize you might feel repetitive. Shared dreams may lose their relevance because you've already experienced a version of them. This isn't about arrogance. It's about the reality of divergence. Your timelines no longer match, and the shared probability field that once connected you starts to thin. This distance can create loneliness. You may find fewer people who truly understand the state you're in because so few have experienced it. The leap you made to escape the constraints of one reality may leave you standing in a new one where you feel isolated, even as you're surrounded by success. The emotional cost is the awareness that progress has outpaced connection. There's also the challenge of integration. When your internal reality shifts faster than your external circumstances can catch up, you live in a liminal space. Part of you is anchored in the new state, while your surroundings still reflect the old. This can create tension, as if you're holding two incompatible realities at once. If not managed, the friction can lead to frustration or burnout. You might be tempted to force your environment to match your new state instantly, but this often creates resistance. The more effective approach is to allow the external to recalibrate at its own pace while you maintain your alignment. Emotionally, there's also a grief that comes with shedding old identities and timelines. Even when the leap is positive, it involves loss. You're leaving behind familiar structures, habits, and even parts of yourself that no longer fit. Some of these were comforting, even if they were limiting. The space they leave behind can feel empty before it feels free. Recognizing this grief as a natural part of accelerated change is crucial. It's not a sign you've made a mistake, but evidence that you've truly shifted. Another cost is the expectation gap. Once you've proven to yourself that leaps are possible, your tolerance for delay diminishes. You may become impatient with processes that still require linear development, even if they serve a purpose. This impatience can strain relationships, decision-making, and even your own enjoyment of progress. You have to learn how to carry the capacity for instant change alongside the patience for deliberate growth where it's needed. Finally, there's the subtle pressure to keep leaping simply because you can. The exhilaration of a new state can become addictive, pushing you to seek the next shift before fully integrating the last one. This can lead to instability, where no reality feels fully inhabited before it's replaced. The cost here is a loss of depth. Your progress is wide but shallow. True mastery involves knowing when to leap and when to root, allowing the reality you've entered to become fully yours before moving again. Outpacing reality is not a reason to slow down if your alignment calls for speed, but it does require awareness of the emotional terrain you're crossing. The key is to balance momentum with integration, speed with connection, so that your leaps build a life that feels rich, grounded, and deeply lived. This balance becomes especially important when every possibility is open to you, which is where we go next, into the tension between infinite potential and practical choice. Mastering tunneling opens the gates to an overwhelming truth. You can go anywhere. Every possible version of your life exists, each carrying its own unique combinations of circumstances, relationships, and outcomes. The realization is intoxicating at first. The barriers you once thought permanent are exposed as optional. The timelines you once envied are suddenly within reach. This is the arrival at infinite possibility. And yet, the moment you stand in front of those countless doorways, another truth emerges. You still have to choose. Possibility without choice is paralysis. With every path open, you face the weight of decision in a way you never did when options were scarce. In the old paradigm, limits simplified life. You didn't have to decide between 1,000 realities because most of them were inaccessible. The grind narrowed your vision to what was realistically available. But now, in the tunneling paradigm, the narrowing is gone. You are confronted with the reality that you could just as easily leap into a radically different life as you could deepen the one you already inhabit. The temptation in this state is to treat possibility as a buffet, sampling one reality after another without fully committing to any of them. While this can expand your understanding of what's available, it can also scatter your energy. Each leap requires coherence, and coherence requires focus. Spreading yourself thin across too many possibilities at once can weaken your signal, making it harder for any single leap to stabilize. Practical choice becomes the balancing force. Practical here does not mean settling for less. It means selecting timelines that serve both your expansion and your stability. It means weighing the resonance of a possibility not just in terms of excitement, but in terms of alignment with your deeper trajectory. You ask, which choice amplifies my long-term state? Which choice creates a foundation for future leaps rather than forcing me to rebuild from scratch? There's also the matter of timing. Infinite possibility does not mean every choice is optimal at every moment. Some realities may be available now but will serve you better later, once you've developed certain capacities or connections. Practical choice involves sequencing your leaps so that each one sets the stage for the next, creating a chain of compounded gains rather than isolated bursts of movement. Emotionally, this stage can trigger a fear of missing out on other possibilities. The mind can become fixated on what's being left behind each time you choose. The antidote is trust, not in fate, but in your own ability to navigate. When you understand that timelines remain accessible even after you've chosen another, the urgency to sample everything right now fades. You can choose one path fully, knowing you can realign to another later if it becomes relevant. Practical choice also involves recognizing your own energetic bandwidth. While the field may hold endless options, your ability to inhabit them is shaped by your current state. Choosing realities that overstretch your coherence can result in unstable leaps that collapse under pressure. The art lies in selecting timelines that stretch you enough to grow without tearing the fabric of your state. In practice, this means filtering possibilities through three lenses: alignment with your core frequency, contribution to your long-term trajectory, and resonance with your present capacity. When all three align, the leap is not only successful but self-reinforcing. It strengthens your ability to handle the next wave of possibility. The irony is that limits return at this stage, but they are self-chosen. You no longer accept barriers imposed by external systems, but you create boundaries for yourself as a form of structure. These self-imposed limits are not cages but frameworks. They focus your energy so you can shape reality with precision rather than scattering it in all directions. Once you master this, infinite possibility stops being overwhelming. It becomes a well-stocked toolbox from which you select with confidence, knowing that every choice you make builds upon the last. And when choice is no longer a source of anxiety, you are free to use tunneling not just as a method of achievement, but as a spiritual practice, a way of engaging with reality that transcends personal gain and touches the core of existence itself. There comes a point where tunneling stops being just a skill for personal advancement and begins to feel like something far deeper. The mechanics are the same: alignment, coherence, probability shifts, leaps, but the intention changes. You're no longer using the process purely to move toward specific goals. You're using it to explore your relationship with existence itself. In this space, quantum tunneling becomes a spiritual practice. This shift often begins subtly. You notice that the same principles that allow you to bypass barriers in your career or relationships also seem to alter your inner world. The act of holding a coherent state, of matching frequency to a reality that exists beyond current perception, requires qualities traditionally cultivated in spiritual disciplines: focus, surrender, presence, and trust. The leap becomes more than a change in external circumstances. It becomes a transformation of consciousness. When tunneling is approached as a spiritual practice, the outcomes matter less than the process of alignment. Each leap is an opportunity to experience the nonlinear nature of reality, to see directly that the boundaries you once accepted are constructs rather than absolutes. This realization can dissolve deep-seated fears about limitation, mortality, and separation. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed being moving through a fixed universe, but as a dynamic point of awareness interacting with an infinite field of possibility. The practice involves cultivating stillness as much as motion. While the early stages of tunneling often emphasize action, taking steps, making adjustments, holding focus, the spiritual dimension asks you to also inhabit the space between actions. This is where you sense the quiet rearrangement of probability, where the leap is already underway even before it becomes visible. Learning to rest in that liminal space without forcing or doubting becomes a form of meditation. Another aspect of tunneling as a spiritual path is the dissolution of the ego's control over outcomes. In the practical phase, you may choose specific realities to aim for. In the spiritual phase, you may instead align to the highest available state without dictating its exact form. You allow the leap to reveal a reality you couldn't have consciously designed, trusting that the field contains possibilities beyond the reach of your current imagination. Over time, this trust deepens into a sense of partnership with the larger intelligence that shapes the universe. You see that tunneling is not something you do alone. It is a co-creative act between your awareness and the field of all that exists. Each leap becomes a moment of communion, a direct exchange between self and reality in its broadest sense. The benefits extend beyond the leaps themselves. the discipline of maintaining alignment, the willingness to act in coherence, and the capacity to release control all cultivate qualities that permeate every part of life. Patience becomes natural because you understand that shifts occur at the optimal moment. Compassion grows because you see that everyone is navigating their own probability field at their own pace. Gratitude becomes constant because every reality, even the ones you choose to leave, contains gifts that served your journey. In this mode, success is not measured by how many leaps you make or how spectacular they are. It's measured by the depth of your presence in whatever reality you inhabit. The act of tunneling becomes a way to repeatedly confirm your connection to the infinite, not to escape the present, but to engage it more fully by remembering its fluid nature. When practiced this way, tunneling is no longer about getting somewhere else. It's about expanding the range of here until it includes every possibility you're capable of experiencing. The leap is both the journey and the destination. And from this vantage point, even the idea of barriers becomes irrelevant. There is only movement, awareness, and the continuous unfolding of reality. From here, it becomes natural to look back and see the walls you once feared for what they truly were. Temporary illusions, shadows cast by an old state of being. That reflection is where we go next, as we begin closing the loop on this exploration. There comes a point where tunneling stops being just a skill for personal advancement and begins to feel like something far deeper. The mechanics are the same: alignment, coherence, probability shifts, leaps, but the intention changes. You're no longer using the process purely to move toward specific goals. You're using it to explore your relationship with existence itself. In this space, quantum tunneling becomes a spiritual practice. This shift often begins subtly. You notice that the same principles that allow you to bypass barriers in your career or relationships also seem to alter your inner world. The act of holding a coherent state, of matching frequency to a reality that exists beyond current perception, requires qualities traditionally cultivated in spiritual disciplines: focus, surrender, presence, and trust. The leap becomes more than a change in external circumstances. It becomes a transformation of consciousness. When tunneling is approached as a spiritual practice, the outcomes matter less than the process of alignment. Each leap is an opportunity to experience the nonlinear nature of reality, to see directly that the boundaries you once accepted are constructs rather than absolutes. This realization can dissolve deep-seated fears about limitation, mortality, and separation. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed being moving through a fixed universe, but as a dynamic point of awareness interacting with an infinite field of possibility. The practice involves cultivating stillness as much as motion. While the early stages of tunneling often emphasize action, taking steps, making adjustments, holding focus, the spiritual dimension asks you to also inhabit the space between actions. This is where you sense the quiet rearrangement of probability, where the leap is already underway even before it becomes visible. Learning to rest in that liminal space without forcing or doubting becomes a form of meditation. Another aspect of tunneling as a spiritual path is the dissolution of the ego's control over outcomes. In the practical phase, you may choose specific realities to aim for. In the spiritual phase, you may instead align to the highest available state without dictating its exact form. You allow the leap to reveal a reality you couldn't have consciously designed, trusting that the field contains possibilities beyond the reach of your current imagination. Over time, this trust deepens into a sense of partnership with the larger intelligence that shapes the universe. You see that tunneling is not something you do alone. It is a co-creative act between your awareness and the field of all that exists. Each leap becomes a moment of communion, a direct exchange between self and reality in its broadest sense. The benefits extend beyond the leaps themselves. The discipline of maintaining alignment, the willingness to act in coherence, and the capacity to release control all cultivate qualities that permeate every part of life. Patience becomes natural because you understand that shifts occur at the optimal moment. Compassion grows because you see that everyone is navigating their own probability field at their own pace. Gratitude becomes constant because every reality, even the ones you choose to leave, contains gifts that served your journey. In this mode, success is not measured by how many leaps you make or how spectacular they are. It's measured by the depth of your presence in whatever reality you inhabit. The act of tunneling becomes a way to repeatedly confirm your connection to the infinite, not to escape the present, but to engage it more fully by remembering its fluid nature. When practiced this way, tunneling is no longer about getting somewhere else. It's about expanding the range of here until it includes every possibility you're capable of experiencing. The leap is both the journey and the destination. And from this vantage point, even the idea of barriers becomes irrelevant. There is only movement, awareness, and the continuous unfolding of reality. From here, it becomes natural to look back and see the walls you once feared for what they truly were. Temporary illusions, shadows cast by an old state of being. That reflection is where we go next, as we begin closing the loop on this exploration. There is a peculiar moment that comes when you have made enough leaps to feel stable in the tunneling paradigm. You pause, not because you are stuck, but because you are finally far enough from your old life to look back with clarity. From this vantage point, something becomes obvious. Most of the walls you once considered immovable never actually existed. They were constructs of perception, boundaries drawn in the mind and reinforced by the culture around you. At the time, those walls felt solid. They dictated the shape of your decisions, the scope of your ambition, and the pace of your movement. They told you which opportunities were realistic and which were out of reach. They made you measure your worth by how much strain you could endure while climbing them. And yet, now that you have experienced the mechanics of tunneling, you can see the truth. They were agreements, not absolutes. An agreement is not inherently negative. Many serve a purpose. But when an agreement masquerades as a law, it becomes a trap. The belief that this is the only way narrows your probability field until you can no longer perceive alternatives. The power of tunneling is that it bypasses the agreement entirely, not by breaking it through force, but by stepping into a reality where it never applied to you. Looking back, the absurdity of some of these supposed laws becomes almost laughable. You remember the narratives that shaped them, the warnings from authority figures, the cautionary tales about people who failed, the unspoken rules about how long things should take. These were reinforced so consistently that they became part of your internal landscape. And because you believed them, you acted within their boundaries. The leap didn't just move you into a new reality. It erased those boundaries from relevance. This retrospective view carries both liberation and a kind of bittersweetness. Liberation because you can see that you were never as trapped as you thought. Bittersweet because you realize how much time and energy were spent navigating walls that weren't really there. The hours invested in climbing, chipping away, or waiting for an opening could have been spent aligning and leaping. But even this realization carries its own gift. You see that every interaction with those false walls prepared you to recognize and appreciate the freedom you now experience. Without the contrast, the openness of the tunneling paradigm might feel unremarkable. The memory of the old constraints sharpens your awareness of what you've gained. Looking back also deepens your ability to help others. When you see someone straining against a wall you now know is imaginary, you can offer them a perspective that might dissolve it. Not through dismissiveness. Telling someone it's all in your head rarely helps, but by showing them, through your own example, that the wall has no absolute authority. You become a living contradiction to their belief in its solidity. There is also a subtle caution in this reflection. Just because you have moved past certain walls does not mean you are immune to new ones. The mind is adept at creating fresh boundaries, especially as you expand into uncharted territory. The trick is to remember the feeling of looking back, that moment when something you once treated as unshakable revealed itself as an illusion. If you can hold that memory, you can apply it to whatever new constraints appear. You can ask yourself, is this truly a wall, or is it an agreement I can choose to stop honoring? From here, the process becomes cyclical. You leap, you look back, you identify the illusions, and you use that clarity to fuel your next leap. Over time, the walls grow thinner, easier to spot before you spend years working around them. The distance between you and the old paradigm widens until the concept of a barrier feels foreign. And yet, as freeing as this is, the work isn't done. You now face a different challenge, integrating the science and mechanics of tunneling into your daily life so fully that it stops being a special technique and becomes your default way of operating. That is the bridge we cross next. At first, quantum tunneling feels like an extraordinary skill, something you turn to for specific high-impact changes. You study the principles, experiment with alignment, and apply it deliberately when you want to bypass a barrier. But if you stop there, tunneling remains a tool you occasionally use rather than a state you continuously inhabit. Integration is about dissolving the distinction between tunneling and living so that the principles of leaps are embedded in every choice, action, and perception you have. The process begins with recognition. You start noticing that the conditions for a leap are not isolated events but patterns that can be cultivated constantly. Coherence, clarity of state, and alignment with probability are not situational. They are habits. When these habits are maintained, you don't have to gear up for a leap. You're already in the frequency where tunneling is possible at any moment. Integration also requires dismantling the mental separation between science and self. In the learning phase, it's common to think of tunneling as a phenomenon that exists in physics, which you then adapt metaphorically to your own life. But over time, you see that the metaphor is the reality. The same principles that govern particles govern your decisions, relationships, and growth. The field doesn't distinguish between a quantum event in a lab and a quantum event in your personal timeline. Both operate on the same rules. One of the most important aspects of integration is environmental alignment. If your surroundings constantly reinforce the old barrier paradigm, your state will be in a perpetual tug-of-war. Integration often involves reshaping your environment so that it supports coherence rather than eroding it. This might mean curating the people you spend time with, the information you consume, and the physical spaces you inhabit. The goal is to make your default context one where leaps are normal, not exceptional. Integration also means refining your language. The words you use shape your state, and your state shapes your probability field. If your vocabulary is filled with phrases like, "I can't," "it will take forever," or "I have no choice," you are reinforcing barriers even if you know how to tunnel past them. Shifting to language that reflects possibility and choice is not empty positivity. It's a way of keeping your alignment tuned. Emotional regulation becomes another cornerstone. In the early stages, emotional spikes can destabilize coherence, pulling you out of alignment before a leap completes. Integration involves training your emotional responses so that you can maintain clarity and stability even under pressure. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means processing them quickly and returning to your chosen state without losing momentum. The deeper integration goes, the more automatic your decisions become. You stop wasting energy debating whether to act in alignment. It's simply what you do. You no longer weigh the cost of bypassing a barrier because it's not a rare expenditure, it's how you function by default. You begin to trust your impulses more because you know they're arising from a coherent field. Ultimately, integration is about identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who knows about tunneling and start seeing yourself as someone who is a constant participant in it. The science stops being something you reference and becomes something you embody. You move through life not as an occasional jumper of timelines, but as a being who naturally exists across probabilities, choosing realities the way others choose routes home. Once you reach this stage, the mechanics are invisible to you, but their effects are everywhere. Barriers dissolve before they form. Opportunities align without forced effort. Time bends naturally, and you carry the awareness that you are shaping reality in every moment, whether you are consciously initiating a leap or simply living your day. From here, the habit of jumping becomes lifelong, not as a burst of ambition, but as an ongoing expression of who you are. And that is exactly where we go next. When tunneling becomes a way of life, it stops feeling like a special event you prepare for and instead becomes an unconscious rhythm, as natural to you as breathing. You no longer wait for the right time to leap because you understand that the conditions for a jump are present far more often than you once believed. You've trained yourself to recognize the subtle shifts in probability that signal an opening, and you've built the reflex to act before hesitation can interfere. This habit doesn't form overnight. It begins with conscious repetition. In the early stages, you have to actively remind yourself that barriers are optional and that alignment is always available. You catch yourself slipping into old thought patterns, the ones that measure progress by distance climbed rather than by frequency matched, and you redirect. Over time, this redirection becomes faster, smoother, and eventually automatic. The key is not just repetition but reinforcement. Each successful leap reinforces the belief that leaping works, and that belief strengthens your ability to leap again. This feedback loop creates a form of momentum that doesn't depend on constant effort. It feeds on its own results. The more you live this way, the more normal it becomes, until the idea of grinding through a barrier feels foreign and unnecessary. A lifelong habit of jumping also requires adaptability. Not every leap will feel the same, and not every opportunity will present itself in a familiar form. You learn to adjust your approach to match the specific texture of the probability field you're working with. Sometimes the leap will be bold and dramatic. Other times it will be subtle, almost imperceptible until you're already on the other side. The constant is your willingness to move when the opening appears. Another hallmark of this habit is resilience. Even with mastery, not every leap lands exactly where you expected. Occasionally you may find yourself in a reality that is different from the one you aimed for. The old mindset would treat this as failure. The jumping habit sees it as information. You recalibrate your state, adjust your alignment, and leap again, without dwelling on the detour. This fluidity prevents stagnation and keeps your probability field dynamic. As the habit deepens, you also become less concerned with explaining it to others. In the beginning, you might feel the need to justify your jumps or convince others of their validity. But over time, you realize that living the results is explanation enough. People will see the evidence in your life, and those ready to leap themselves will seek you out. Those who aren't ready will remain on their chosen timelines, and you respect that without judgment. What emerges from this constant practice is a sense of lightness. You are no longer burdened by the weight of every barrier, nor are you endlessly strategizing about how to overcome them. You move fluidly through realities, letting your state be the compass and your coherence be the fuel. This doesn't mean you avoid challenge. It means challenge no longer defines your pace. Living this way shifts your relationship with identity. You stop attaching to fixed definitions of who you are, because each leap reshapes you. The you that began this journey is not the same as the you reading these words now, and the you that will leap next will be different still. Instead of resisting this fluidity, you embrace it, knowing that identity is not a wall but a wave, and that wave can carry you anywhere. And this brings us naturally to the next and final understanding. To fully master tunneling, you must learn to be both particle and wave, both the realized self in this moment and the infinite potential of every possible self that exists. In quantum mechanics, the duality of particle and wave is one of the most astonishing realities. Something can be both a fixed, measurable presence and a spread of infinite probabilities, depending on how it is observed. For most of your life, you've been taught to live as the particle, defined, located, and stable. Tunneling has shown you the power of the wave, the expansive, uncollapsed field of possibility from which all realities can be drawn. The ultimate mastery is not choosing one over the other, but becoming both. Being the particle means inhabiting a reality fully, without dilution. It means committing to the moment you are in, engaging with it as if it were the only one, not because it is, but because depth requires presence. Without the particle state, life becomes diffuse. You're always somewhere else in your mind, chasing another possibility, never fully tasting the one you've chosen. Being the wave means holding the awareness that you are never confined to this single state. It means remembering, in every moment, that countless other realities are accessible, and that the boundaries of this one are permeable. Without the wave state, you become trapped in the illusion of finality, believing that what is now is all there will ever be. The paradox and the power comes from holding both simultaneously. As the particle, you give reality weight and richness. As the wave, you give it openness and freedom. Together, they allow you to live deeply without being trapped, and to change without losing substance. Practically, this means that when you leap into a new reality, you inhabit it completely. You don't treat it as a waiting room for the next jump. You allow it to shape you, teach you, and become part of your trajectory. At the same time, you never forget that you can leap again at will. This keeps you from clinging to any state out of fear, and it frees you to extract the fullest value from each experience before moving on. The integration of particle and wave also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Most people fear the unknown because they see it as a void, a loss of control. In the wave state, the unknown is simply uncollapsed potential. In the particle state, you have the stability to navigate it without being overwhelmed. Together, they create a kind of fearless curiosity, a willingness to step into what's next without demanding a guarantee. This dual awareness also refines your sense of timing. As the particle, you can sense when you've fully absorbed the value of your current reality. As the wave, you can feel when the probability field is ripe for a leap. You move when both align, creating transitions that are smooth, precise, and deeply resonant. Ultimately, becoming both particle and wave is about mastery of self. You are no longer just a being moving through reality, you are an active shaper of it, aware that you exist in multiple forms at once. You can be fully here while also being infinitely everywhere. And when you operate from that place, the concept of limitation becomes irrelevant. This is the threshold to the final leap, not just another jump to a new timeline, but a conscious, deliberate, irreversible step into the version of you that embodies everything tunneling has revealed. That is where we go next, as we bring this journey to its closing moment. Every leap you've made up to this point has prepared you for one thing, this moment. The journey has been filled with dismantled walls, redefined possibilities, shifts in identity, and the blending of science with self until the mechanics of tunneling became second nature. You've learned to live without the grind, to align with probability fields, to collapse into chosen realities, to balance infinite possibility with deliberate choice, and to operate as both particle and wave. And yet, everything so far has been preparation, not conclusion. The final leap is not just another jump into a slightly better version of your life. It is the irreversible step into the reality that reflects the deepest truth of who you are. This leap does not leave a path back. It closes the door on the old paradigm entirely, not because you are escaping it, but because you no longer have any resonance with it. Can't hold you anymore. You've outgrown its gravity. What makes this leap different is that it's not driven by urgency, desperation, or the desire to escape a problem. It is driven by alignment so pure that the current reality, even if it is good, feels incomplete. You sense something greater, not as a distant dream, but as an active pull on your awareness. The leap is no longer about fixing life. It's about inhabiting the fullest possible expression of it. To make this leap, you draw on everything you've learned. You've practiced coherence until it is automatic. You've mastered the art of shifting frequency to match a chosen reality. You've refined your awareness of timing so you know when the field is ready. And you've trained yourself to act without hesitation when that opening appears. But here, something else is required: total surrender to the reality you are stepping into. In smaller leaps, you could hedge your bets, keeping some part of your identity anchored to the old state just in case. In the final leap, there is no such safety line. The version of you that takes this step will not exist on the other side. This is why it's called irreversible, not because you couldn't technically return to an old probability field, but because you will never again be the person who would choose to. Taking this leap also means accepting that you will be misunderstood. The further you move from the barrier paradigm, the less your life will make sense to those still operating within it. The choices you make, the pace at which you move, the opportunities that appear, all of it will seem improbable or impossible to them. And that's exactly as it should be. You are no longer shaping your reality according to the collective agreements of the old paradigm. The leap is not just into a new set of circumstances, but into a new rhythm of existence. Once taken, the old cycles of grinding, waiting, and forcing become irrelevant. Your actions will flow from alignment, not effort. Your progress will be measured in states of being, not miles traveled. The how of your life will become as effortless as the why has always been calling you. There is a sacred stillness just before this leap. It is the pause where your entire field reorganizes, where every probability you've ever touched recalibrates to accommodate what's about to happen. You feel both the weight and the lightness of it, the weight of leaving behind everything you've known, and the lightness of knowing you're stepping into something far greater. This is the point where fear may try to reassert itself. Not the fear of failure, you've moved beyond that, but the fear of disappearing into something so vast that you can't fully comprehend it. This is where the particle and the wave work together. As the particle, you anchor in the trust that you will remain a coherent self in whatever reality you enter. As the wave, you release into the infinite, knowing that every possibility is already part of you. And then you move, not with a push, not with strain, but with the natural inevitability of something that has been building for a long time. The leap itself is instantaneous. One moment you are here, the next you are elsewhere. There is no sensation of travel, no gradual climb. It simply is. You are. And in that moment, you know that this is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new way of existing entirely. When you open your awareness to this new reality, you find that it feels both unfamiliar and inevitable. The circumstances may surprise you, but the state you're in does not. It's the state you've been tuning to all along, now fully embodied. Everything around you reflects it. Opportunities match it. People resonate with it. Even the challenges you face here are of a different order. They are aligned with your expansion, not with old limitations. From here, the idea of a final leap becomes almost ironic. This leap feels final only because it ends your relationship with the old paradigm. But in truth, it is the start of a life where leaping is no longer an event. It is the baseline. You live in motion, not as someone chasing change, but as someone who understands that change is the natural state of the universe. Where we go from here is not a single path. It is an open expanse of possibilities, each one accessible without the grind, each one a valid choice. The difference now is that you no longer wonder whether you can leap. You simply choose where to leap next, or whether to remain still and let the next reality form around you. You've earned the freedom to move without urgency, to act without proving anything, to live without barriers. This is where the practice becomes legacy. The way you exist now becomes an example for others, not because you set out to teach, but because the evidence of your life speaks for itself. You become the quiet proof that walls are optional, that timelines can be chosen, that reality is not fixed but responsive. And for those ready to hear it, that proof is the opening to their own first leap. The final leap, then, is not an ending but a passing of the torch from the version of you that learned how to tunnel to the version of you that simply lives that way. From here, every moment is both particle and wave, both presence and potential. And in this state, the universe is no longer something you move through. It is something you move with. This is where we go from here, into a reality where there are no walls, only openings. No limits, only choices. No waiting, only alignment. The rest is yours to shape. The leap is already underway.